Across deserts, mountains, and forgotten coastlines, our ancestors left behind structures that feel too ambitious for their age. Giant statues cut from volcanic stone, temples carved into cliffs, and tombs hidden beneath miles of earth. Some were buried by floods, others abandoned by civilizations that vanished without a trace. Yet each ruin carries the same quiet question: how did they build this, and why? This documentary follows extraordinary finds: megaliths older than writing, cities carved into mountains, guardians standing alone in empty plains, places that still hold their purpose in silence. If you listen closely, these ancient works begin to sound less like relics and more like messages. The stone-seated god of Monte Alto. On the Pacific coast of Guatemala, beneath the slopes of dormant volcanoes and thick tropical air, lies one of the most curious sights in the ancient Americas, Monte Alto. It is a place where giant stone figures sit in silence, older than the Maya, older even than written history in this region. They are round-bodied, heavy-limbed, and expressionless. Yet something about them feels alive, and among them one figure stands apart: the stone-seated god, a colossal basalt statue that seems to defy both time and explanation. For centuries, the statue lay half-buried in the earth, a weathered shape of dark stone, worn smooth by centuries of rain. It wasn't until the 20th century that archaeologists began to uncover the site and realized that Monte Alto was home to one of the earliest sculptural traditions in all of Mesoamerica, dating back nearly 2,500 years. The figures they found, known as the baragones, or big-bellied ones, were not warriors, not kings, but something far older, more symbolic. They were deities, ancestors, or beings from a time when myth and history were the same. The seated god of Monte Alto is carved from basalt, a dense volcanic rock that would have required enormous effort to shape. The nearest quarries lie kilometers away, across rugged terrain, meaning the sculptors not only carved but also transported these massive stones, some weighing several tons. What they created were rounded, human-like figures, sitting cross-legged, their bellies full, their faces calm, eyes closed in eternal meditation. But when scientists examined these statues, they found something extraordinary. Certain stones at Monte Alto, including the seated god, were magnetic, not slightly, but strongly enough that compasses spun wildly near them. Even more puzzling, the magnetic points were not random. They were concentrated specifically on parts of the statues: the forehead, the navel, sometimes the cheeks or chest. It was as if whoever carved them had known exactly where the natural magnetism in the basalt lay, and had deliberately aligned their sculpture to it. To modern eyes, that seems almost impossible. Detecting magnetic anomalies in stone requires technology, or at least experimentation with tools that react to magnetic fields. Yet these statues were made nearly 2 millennia before compasses were invented, before magnetism was even a known concept in recorded science. How then did the ancient sculptors know? Some researchers suggest the builders may have noticed unusual effects: tools sticking slightly to certain rocks or a subtle attraction between stones. Perhaps they interpreted this invisible force as sacred, a sign that the stone itself was alive. In that worldview, carving the rock was not simply an act of craftsmanship, but of communication, awakening the power within it. The alignment of magnetic zones with the head and belly might not have been coincidence but intention, placing energy where the spirit and life were believed to reside. To the ancient peoples of Mesoamerica, the body was a map of the cosmos, each part linked to elements, deities, and natural forces. The head was the seat of thought and divinity, the belly, the center of life and creation. That the seated god's magnetism focuses on these same points deepens the mystery. Was this by chance? Or did the carvers of Monte Alto possess a sensitivity to the material world that modern science has only rediscovered? The broader site of Monte Alto gives further context. Dozens of sculptures, both human and zoomorphic, were arranged across the landscape. Some are round heads with soft, smiling expressions. Others depict seated figures like the seated god. Many have been intentionally placed facing east or west, aligned with celestial directions. Archaeologists believe Monte Alto may have been a ritual center, a gathering place for early Mesoamerican cultures who would later give rise to the Olmecs and Maya. The basalt itself came from volcanic outcrops that dominate the horizon. For the people who lived here, volcanoes were both creators and destroyers, sources of life-giving fertility and sudden ruin. Carving statues from volcanic rock might have symbolized taming that power, giving form to the forces that shaped their world. In that sense, the seated god was not just a sculpture, but an embodiment of nature itself, a living stone, heavy with meaning, anchored between earth and spirit. The figure's design reflects this philosophy. It is not detailed like later Maya carvings. There are no ornaments or inscriptions. Instead, its power lies in simplicity, massive volume, round symmetry, a stillness that seems eternal. Its calm expression is almost meditative, as if the god is neither watching nor sleeping, but existing in a state between both. The folds of the body, the curve of the limbs, the rounded belly, all feel deliberate, balanced, organic. This was not the human form idealized, but spiritualized, made universal, timeless. When the statue was tested with instruments in the 1970s, the results confirmed that the magnetic field was not random, it was focused, consistent, and distinct from the surrounding Earth. The discovery prompted debate. Could magnetism have been a factor in the statue's spiritual role? If ancient priests or shamans had noticed the stone's unusual properties, they might have interpreted it as evidence of divine power. In many early cultures, unseen forces, heat, sound, light, magnetism, were considered sacred manifestations of gods. The seated god, therefore, may have been more than an idol. It may have been an interface between matter and mystery, where human hands shaped the unseen. The rest of Monte Alto supports this interpretation. Nearby mounds suggest ceremonial structures, platforms where rituals could have taken place. Fragments of pottery, offerings, and carvings have been found near the statues, indicating that they were venerated long after their creation. Later civilizations may have visited Monte Alto, recognizing its sacredness even after its builders had vanished. The identity of the carvers themselves remains uncertain. Some scholars attribute the site to the pre-Olmec or late formative cultures of the region, possibly linked to the Azapa culture that later flourished along the same coast. Others suggest that Monte Alto represents a unique, localized tradition, a civilization that arose, achieved mastery of stone, and disappeared without record. Standing before the seated god today, one senses that uncertainty, not as absence, but presence, the presence of something vast, silent, and unknowable. The statue's surface, polished by rain, carries the sheen of centuries. Moss grows in the creases of its belly, roots curl around its base, yet it remains upright, composed, unbroken. Its magnetism, though invisible, still hums faintly, a force from the earth itself, unchanged by time. For the people who carved it, the seated god may have represented fertility, strength, or balance. To modern eyes, it represents the oldest dialogue between human and stone, a moment when our ancestors began to see not just what was visible, but what was hidden. They carved not to imitate nature, but to participate in it, to give shape to energies they could feel but not explain. In that sense, the statue is more than a relic. It is a symbol of how ancient minds perceived the world, not as separate from the sacred, but as infused with it. The basalt was not dead matter, it was alive, charged with unseen spirit. The hands that shaped it were not just working, they were listening. The stone-seated god of Monte Alto remains a mystery that bridges science and spirituality. Its magnetism challenges logic, its serenity transcends time. It stands as both artifact and question, proof that even in prehistory, humanity had already learned to sense what could not yet be measured. And as the wind moves across the Guatemalan plain, touching the statue's dark surface, one can almost imagine the quiet hum beneath the stone. The echo of something ancient still pulsing, faint but eternal, in the heart of the earth. The giant limestone and cliffs of De Gabel, El Silsila, along the narrow cliffs of the Nile Valley, where the river cuts a winding path through southern Egypt, lies a place that once supplied the stones for temples, obelisks, and colossal statues. This is Gabel El Silsila, an ancient quarry site that stretches for kilometers along rugged sandstone walls. Here, rising from the rock like silent guardians, are carvings unlike anything else in Egypt's sacred landscape. Giant ankhs, some taller than a person, cut deep into the living stone. They are not decorative marks or casual graffiti. They are deliberate, monumental symbols, carefully placed, carefully carved, and still carrying the weight of the meaning they held thousands of years ago. The ankh, the ancient Egyptian sign of life, is one of the oldest and most enduring symbols ever created. It represented breath, rebirth, vitality, and the eternal cycle connecting gods and humans. In temples, it appeared in the hands of deities. In tombs, it symbolized the promise of the afterlife. Yet here, at Gebel el Silsila, a quarry, not a temple, the ankh takes on another layer of meaning. Carved directly into the cliffs where workers once cut huge sandstone blocks, the symbol seems to sanctify the very stone from which Egypt's monuments were born. The ankh carvings at Gebel el Silsila vary in size, but many are enormous. Half meter, 1 meter, even larger, their outlines bold against the sandstone. Some appear alone on a flat wall, while others are carved beside deities, inscriptions, or quarry marks. They are placed near ancient extraction sites, on cliff faces where workers labored under the heat of the sun, cutting stone that would eventually become temple pylons and sacred columns. Why carve the symbol of life in a place of labor, dust, and extraction? The answer lies partly in the nature of the quarry itself. Gebel el Silsila was not simply a mine, it was a spiritual landscape, a place where stone was believed to hold divine essence. To the ancient Egyptians, certain quarried materials were not raw resources, but sacred gifts from the earth. The Nile Valley's sandstone cliffs were associated with powerful regional gods, especially Sobek, the crocodile god who was honored in shrines carved directly into the quarry walls. Workers carved stelae, chapels, and votive offerings here, gestures of gratitude and protection. The giant ankhs likely served a similar purpose. They were carved as marks of blessing, symbols that the work done here, heavy as it was, belonged to a higher order. The stone being cut would rise again as temples and statues. In this sense, carving the ankh into the quarry wall expressed a belief that the stone carried divine life within it, even before it was shaped by tools. Walking through the quarry today, one can trace the ancient extraction points, rectangular blocks removed with clean precision, tool marks still visible after thousands of years. Nearby, the ankhs stand out like stamps of approval, carved by the same hands that shaped the quarry. Their lines are confident, steady, and deep, made with a rhythm that suggests expertise rather than haste. The workers who carved them may have been craftsmen, but they were also participants in ritual, creating marks meant to guide and protect their labor. The scale of Gebel el-Silsila itself is staggering. For centuries across the reigns of pharaohs from the New Kingdom to the Roman era, this quarry provided stone for temples across Egypt. Luxor, Karnak, Kom Ombo, Esna, Edfu, many of the great monuments lining the Nile, owe their massive blocks to this site. Unlike other quarries that focused on a single structure or era, Silsila was active for more than 1,000 years. The ankhs carved into the stone are reminders of this continuity, symbols linking one generation of workers to the next, binding their efforts in a chain of life that stretched across dynasties. Some of the largest ankhs are carved on cliffs overlooking the river. From these vantage points, the Nile flows gently behind them, shimmering in the sun. The placement seems intentional. The ankhs, symbol of life, appearing high above the water that sustained Egypt's existence. The alignment suggests the carvings were meant to be seen, not only by workers, but by the river itself, perhaps as a mark of offering or reverence. Other ankhs are found inside small rock-cut shrines. These chapels, carved by quarry workers and overseers, contain scenes of gods, processions, and prayers. In one chapel, an ankh appears beside a depiction of Sobek and the king, linking the divine crocodile, the ruler, and the symbol of life in a single carved tableau. These shrines were not just places of worship, they were sanctuaries for workers who spent long months in isolation, far from larger settlements. The carvings suggest that quarrying was not seen as a simple craft, but as a sacred duty. The stone itself adds another layer to the story. The sandstone of Gebel el-Silsila is rich in iron and minerals, giving it hues ranging from warm gold to deep red. In certain light, the carved ankhs appear darker than the surrounding surface, their outlines catching shadow and contrast. The texture of the stone is rough but durable, able to preserve detail for millennia. In carving the ankh here, the workers ensured that their symbol of life would endure in the very material that built Egypt's sacred spaces. What makes the ankhs at Silsila unique is not only their size but their context. In temples, the ankh is held by gods offering life to the king. In tombs, it symbolizes resurrection. But in a quarry, the symbol takes on a broader meaning. Life not just for individuals, but for the civilization itself. The stone being cut each day would become part of Egypt's identity. Every block taken from this cliff contributed to the architecture that still defines Egypt's horizon. In this sense, the giant ankhs serve as reminders that civilizations are built from both stone and spirit. They honor the laborers whose work shaped temples, statues, and gateways. They mark the quarry not as a place of toil alone, but as a place of creation, a beginning point for monuments that still stand. To stand before one of these carvings is to feel the weight of that history. The cliffs rise high, their surfaces warm with desert heat. The carved lines of the ankh, though weathered, remain bold. The silence of the quarry is deep, broken only by the wind moving across the river, the same wind that once cooled the faces of workers shaping blocks by hand. The giant limestone ankhs of Gebel el-Silsila are more than symbols. They are signatures, marks left by anonymous craftsmen who understood that what they were building would outlast them. They carved life into the stone before sending it on its journey, merging faith with labor, art with endurance. And though the temples built from this quarry have suffered the wear of centuries, these ankhs remain exactly where they were first carved, still watching over the cliffs, still carrying the quiet message the ancient workers left behind. That creation begins long before the monument is finished, and that life, meaning, and sacred purpose can be found in every stage of the work. The giant stone feet of Nimrud. Beneath the plains of northern Iraq, where winds move like whispers over buried palaces, lie the remains of one of history's greatest ancient cities, Nimrud, the royal capital of the Assyrian Empire. Among the ruins of its palaces, temples, and colossal gateways, archaeologists uncovered a fragment that feels almost human in its simplicity, a pair of giant stone feet, carved from limestone, all that remain of a massive statue that once towered over the city. These feet, broken cleanly at the ankles, stand upon a decorated pedestal as if the rest of the figure simply vanished into the air. Their toes are thick and heavy, modeled with careful proportion. The sandals show deep grooves and patterns, evidence of deliberate craftsmanship. The scale is enormous, far larger than any human, suggesting a statue that once rose several meters high. In ancient Assyria, colossal statues guarded palaces and marked sacred thresholds. Kings commissioned stone figures not merely as decoration but as embodiments of authority. They were meant to intimidate, to inspire, to declare the power of the empire. The feet at Nimrud are thought to be part of such a statue, perhaps of a king, a deity, or a protective spirit. Nimrud, known anciently as Kalahu, thrived during the reign of kings such as Ashurnasirpal II and Shalmaneser III. Its palaces were lined with reliefs depicting hunts, battles, and rituals. Winged bulls with human heads, the Lamassu, stood at entrances, combining human intellect, animal strength, and divine protection. Against this backdrop of mythic beings, the giant feet fit naturally. They were part of a world where scale equaled significance. The stone feet were discovered in a ruined courtyard, surrounded by fragments of walls and fallen slabs decorated with cuneiform inscriptions. The fact that only the feet remain suggests a violent destruction, perhaps during invasions, earthquakes, or later looting. The upper portion of the statue may have been toppled, broken, or taken. What survived were the feet, too heavy to move and too strong to shatter completely. Examining them closely, one notices the details: the curve of the nails, the texture carved into the sandals, the angle of the stance. The feet are neither rigid nor stylized. They are naturalistic, suggesting a sculptor trained in the Assyrian tradition of realism. The stance implies a forward posture, as if the figure once stepped into the courtyard with purpose. Whoever the statue represented, it must have been a commanding presence. In Assyrian art, feet were not trivial details. They conveyed movement, intention, and authority. A stride forward meant dominance, a planted stance meant stability. These giant feet, frozen in stone, capture that symbolism even without the body above. Around them, the ruins of Nimrud tell a broader story. This was a city built for kings who imagined themselves guardians of the world. They carved texts claiming to expand borders from sea to sea, and erected monuments to preserve their memory forever. Yet despite their ambition, their city eventually fell, burned, and buried. The surviving feet reflect that contradiction, strength enduring amid collapse. Some archaeologists believe these feet may have belonged to a seated statue rather than a standing one, perhaps part of a throne scene or ceremonial depiction. The base beneath the feet includes decorative motifs that could indicate a platform or dais. In that case, the statue may have represented a ruler receiving tribute or offering blessings. The feet are also significant in their material. Limestone, though softer than basalt, was widely used in Assyrian sculpture. Its relative ease of carving allowed for detail, while its weight ensured durability. These feet, carved with care, were meant to last. That they survived while the upper sections did not adds a sense of poetic irony. The foundation remains when the figure above is gone. In the quiet ruin of Nimrud, the giant stone feet stand like reminders of ambition and fragility. They belong to a civilization that gave the world writing, mathematics, and monumental art. A civilization that rose with unmatched power and then fell into dust. Yet the feet, rooted to their pedestal, continue to bear witness to the passage of time. Standing before them, one senses both presence and absence. The scale hints at the figure that once towered above, but its disappearance invites imagination. The feet ground the statue in reality, yet the missing body lifts it into mystery. They evoke a moment frozen between creation and ruin, the last imprint of a once living idea carved into stone. For the Assyrians, monuments were more than art. They were extensions of kingship, embodiments of divine mandate. The giant feet of Nimrud reflect that belief, a fragment of a message once declared boldly across the empire. Even broken, they maintain their authority. Their weight, their form, their endurance tell the story of a world where power was carved in stone, and where even in ruin, that stone still speaks. The lost fortress of Porbajin. In the vast emptiness of southern Siberia, where mountains fade into marshland and the sky seems endless, there is an island that should not exist, and on that island stands a fortress that raises more questions than answers. Its walls rise in perfect rectangles out of a frozen lake, its courtyards laid out with geometric order, and its gates aligned with the horizon. The locals call it Porbajin, the clay house. To archaeologists, it is one of the most enigmatic structures in Eurasia, a fortress built in the middle of nowhere, by a people whose presence there remains uncertain. The first impression of Porbajin is one of precision. The island, sitting in the center of Lake Terikoil, is only accessible by a narrow strip of land when waters recede. On this isolated platform, ancient builders erected a rectangular complex nearly 400 by 200 meters in size. Its outer walls are thick, reinforced with timber and clay, rising like the skeleton of a forgotten palace. Inside, rooms and corridors divide the space symmetrically, with paved courtyards, ceremonial halls, and foundations of structures whose purpose can only be guessed. The site dates to around the 8th century CE, a period dominated by the Uyghur Khaganate, the nomadic empire that once ruled these steppes. Yet nothing about Porbajin resembles a steppe encampment. The architecture is strikingly different. The layout, the proportions, even the gate design echo the style of Tang-era Chinese palaces. The builders used timber frames, clay walls, and tiled roofs, creating a compound that looks more like a monastery or royal retreat than a military fortress. This architectural contrast lies at the heart of the mystery. Why would the Uyghur rulers build something so elaborate, so foreign in style, in a place so remote? And why, after such immense effort, does there seem to be almost no evidence that it was ever lived in? Excavations revealed nearly no domestic debris, no hearths, no refuse pits, no signs of long-term occupation. The rooms are clean, almost untouched, as if the builders completed the fortress and then simply left. One explanation centers on religion and diplomacy. During the 8th century, the Uyghur elite formed alliances with Tang China, adopting elements of its architecture and ceremonial culture. Porbajin may have been constructed as a summer palace, a place where rulers could perform rituals or host diplomatic gatherings in seclusion. The open courtyards and central pavilions fit this interpretation. Spaces designed for ceremony rather than habitation. Another theory suggests that the fortress was built as a monastic retreat, possibly influenced by Manichaeism, the spiritual tradition that spread through the Uyghur Empire at the time. Manichaean leaders emphasized isolation and purity, and Porbajin's loneliness in the middle of the lake could reflect such ideals. The layout of the complex, with its symmetrical paths and quiet enclosed spaces, hints at ritual rather than defense. Yet the island itself complicates these ideas. Geological studies reveal that Lake Terikowal did not always exist in its current form. The island on which the fortress sits was once part of a larger landscape. Earthquakes and shifting soils gradually isolated it, turning an open plateau into a lake. If so, the builders may not have intended the fortress to be surrounded by water at all. Its island form may be the result of natural forces rather than design. Even with this possibility, the site's placement remains strange. The surrounding region offers little agricultural value, harsh winters last for months, and storms frequently batter the lake's surface. A palace or monastery built here would have faced extreme isolation. For this reason, some researchers propose that Porbajin served as a ritual sanctuary, a place visited only seasonally or for specific ceremonies tied to the landscape. The interior structures support this idea. The main building sits at the center of the complex, raised on a platform and aligned with the cardinal directions. Its foundations suggest open halls supported by wooden pillars, with no signs of cooking or domestic activity. Decorative fragments indicate that the building was once painted in bright pigments, reds, whites, and blacks, echoing sacred architecture of Central Asia. And then there is the strangest detail, signs of fire damage on parts of the fortress. Some walls show charring. Wooden beams collapsed in patterns that indicate burning. This could mark a violent event, but there are no weapons, no signs of siege, no scattered remains. The burn patterns may instead point to abandonment. In many ancient cultures, buildings that were no longer used were deliberately burned as part of a closure ritual, a way to release the spirit of the place. The more archaeologists studied Porbajin, the clearer one thing became. It was never meant to be a home. It was a statement, a gesture of power, faith, or diplomacy, carved into a landscape between mountains and sky. Whatever its builders intended, the site seems to have served its purpose briefly and then fallen silent. Standing inside the walls today, one can imagine its past only in fragments, the echo of footsteps on clay floors, the distant reflection of mountains on the lake, the sound of wind moving through open courtyards, the feeling of a place created not for everyday life, but for moments, specific, rare, deliberate. The isolation adds to its aura. Snow covers the ruins for most of the year, wrapping the clay walls in white silence. In summer, when the lake thaws, the fortress rises from the water like a memory, precise, geometric, and strangely untouched. Time has worn its edges, but the symmetry remains, the design still visible, the purpose still elusive. Porbajin is often called the Siberian Atlantis, not because it sank, but because it remains suspended between worlds, between steppe and empire, between faith and power, between memory and forgetting. Its builders left no inscription, no explanation, only walls that reflect intentions we can sense but not name. Yet this silence is part of its power. The lost fortress of Porbajin stands as a reminder that not all monuments are meant to be understood. Some were built for reasons rooted in belief, in ritual, or in politics known only to the people of their time. What survives is the structure, calm, symmetrical, enduring, an echo of a vision that crossed cultures and landscapes. Even now, surrounded by water and solitude, Purbhajan feels purposeful. The geometry of its design, the precision of its walls, the quiet that fills its courtyards, all suggest that meaning still lingers. The fortress may be abandoned, but it is not empty. It holds the presence of what it once meant, even if the world no longer remembers. The Kamanaya Baba stone idols. Across the endless grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, where the horizon stretches in every direction and the wind moves like a living thing, stand figures carved from stone, silent, weathered, strangely human. They rise from the ground with rounded bodies and simple faces, staring out over the plains as if watching something long forgotten. These are the Kamanaya Baba statues, ancient stone idols scattered across Ukraine, southern Russia, and Central Asia. Their origins are mysterious, their purpose still debated, and their presence unmistakably powerful. For thousands of years, these statues have stood alone in open fields, on burial mounds, along riverbanks, and atop windswept ridges, carved from sandstone or granite. Some rise as tall as a person, others much larger. Though each one is different, they share a distinct form, a humanoid figure with a rounded head, simple facial features, and hands folded over the abdomen, often holding a cup, a weapon, or nothing at all. Their style is minimal, their expressions serene, neither smiling nor stern, but calm, almost meditative. The word Baba does not mean grandmother, as it might in Slavic languages today. In older Turkic languages, it simply meant ancestor or elder. And in many ways, that is what these stones were meant to be, ancestral guardians, set in the landscape to watch over the living, protect the land, and hold memory for a people constantly on the move. The traditions behind these statues stretch across multiple cultures. The steppe was never home to one civilization, but to waves of nomadic societies, the Scythians, Sarmatians, Turkic tribes, Kipchaks, and many others. Each group left its own style of carving, yet all saw the steppe as a sacred space where life and death were tied to the land itself. The statues became markers of that belief, guardians of clans, symbols of lineage, or representations of the honored dead. Archaeologists studying the Kamanaya Baba have found them often placed atop or near kurgans, ancient burial mounds. This has led many to believe they once stood as memorials, representing individuals whose spirits were believed to watch over the community. The figure's folded hands resemble a gesture of offering or contemplation, suggesting a connection between the physical world and the spiritual one. Some statues clearly represent women, wearing necklaces, carved breasts, or holding symbolic objects. Others are male, shown with belts, daggers, or cups. This variety suggests that the statues did not symbolize gods alone. They may have represented real people, or perhaps archetypes of ancestors whose presence anchored a tribe in the vast and shifting plains. For nomadic societies, where settlements were temporary and belongings few, carving a durable stone figure was a powerful gesture, a fixed point in an ever-changing world. The stone for these statues was often quarried far from their final resting places. Some weigh several tons, and would have required coordinated effort to transport across great distances, likely using wooden sledges, animals, and sheer manpower. The labor invested speaks to the importance of these monuments. They were not decorations, they were statements, markers of identity, territory, and continuity. The facial features of the statues are deliberately simple, almost abstract. Large circular eyes, a straight nose, a faint mouth. Their minimalism feels intentional, as if the sculptors meant to capture essence rather than likeness. The simplicity also allowed the statues to weather harsh winds, rain, and snow while retaining their form. Over centuries, many have softened even more, their surfaces smoothed by time, until they feel almost alive, rounded like river stones, shaped as much by the earth as by human hands. Some Kamanaya Baba carry objects carved into their torsos, cups, bowls, weapons, or symbols. The meanings remain uncertain. The cup may represent hospitality, ritual offerings, or the passage between worlds. A dagger might symbolize protection or status. Necklaces and garments carved in relief hint at social roles or tribal identity. Each detail, though spare, carries the faint echo of a culture that spoke through stone when words would not survive. The landscape around these statues is part of their meaning. The steppe is vast, open and quiet, a place where time feels horizontal rather than vertical. To stand in front of a stone idol in such a setting is to feel the presence of something both ancient and immediate. Their stillness is matched only by the wind, which moves constantly through the grass, creating a soft rustle that feels like breath. These statues were not meant to be hidden away, they were meant to face the world, to stand beneath the sky, to inhabit the land like living guardians. Over centuries, different cultures rediscovered these statues and interpreted them in new ways. Medieval travelers wrote of them with awe or fear. Local legends grew. Some saw them as petrified warriors, frozen for their sins. Others believed they were protectors of villages or markers of sacred ground. Even when their original meaning faded, their presence remained undeniable. The earth remembered what people forgot. Modern excavations reveal that the Kamanaya Baba tradition lasted for more than 1,000 years. The earliest examples may date back to the Bronze Age, while later ones were carved well into the medieval period. This continuity suggests that the practice was not tied to one tribe or religion, but to the broader steppe worldview, a belief that ancestors remain part of the land and that stone can hold memory across generations. The statues also speak of movement. As tribes migrated across Eurasia, styles changed, but the core idea remained, a human-shaped stone set into the earth facing the horizon. Some scholars believe the statues marked boundaries or seasonal routes. Others see them as offerings to deities of the open sky. None of these interpretations cancel the others. The statues may have served multiple purposes, evolving as cultures shifted. What remains most striking is the emotional silence of the figures. They do not tell stories directly, yet they hold space for stories to be imagined. Their simplicity invites connection. Their form suggests endurance. They represent the universal human need to leave something behind, something that stands when life moves on. Today, many statues lie toppled, broken, or half-buried. Others remain standing exactly where they were placed centuries ago, their eyes still fixed on the horizon. They continue to watch over the steppe, just as they were meant to. Their presence is a reminder that even in a world that changes constantly, some things endure. Not because they resist time, but because they become part of it. The Khmer Naya Baba stone idols are among the oldest expressions of human identity carved into stone. They carry the weight of forgotten lives, forgotten tribes, and forgotten beliefs, yet they still stand with quiet dignity, embodying the same truth their makers understood, that memory begins in the earth, and that to carve stone is to carve permanence into a world of impermanence. The stone throne of Knossos. In the warm light of Crete, where the Aegean wind moves through olive groves and across ruined courtyards, stands a palace unlike any other in Europe's ancient world. Knossos, sprawling, layered, half myth and half memory, rises from the earth with stairways that lead nowhere, pillars that once supported vast halls, and walls that whisper the last traces of a lost civilization. In the heart of this labyrinth lies something older than any European throne room, older than classical kings and their empires. A stone throne, carved from gypsum, smooth and pale, resting against the wall of a chamber used more than 3,500 years ago. It is the oldest throne in Europe, the seat of a ruler, or perhaps a goddess, and even now it holds its silence with extraordinary dignity. The stone throne of Knossos is not a grand seat of power. It is simple in form, narrow, high-backed, almost delicate in its curves, yet it carries a presence that overshadows the room around it. The chamber in which it sits is small, enclosed, lined with benches carved from the same stone. A ceremonial basin lies across from it, and faint traces of painted griffins once flanked its sides. To stand inside the room is to feel time compress, the weight of rituals long forgotten lingering in the air. The throne is carved from white gypsum, a stone soft enough to shape but bright enough to glow when struck by light. Its surface, worn by centuries, still reflects craftsmanship marked by care and intention. The back curves gently like a shell. The seat is modest, built not for display but for presence. There is nothing boastful about it. No gold, no ornamentation, no symbols of military might. It feels personal, almost sacred, as though it belonged not to a king of conquest, but to a figure whose authority flowed from belief rather than force. For decades, archaeologists debated who sat upon this throne. The culture of Knossos, the Minoan civilization, left behind no clear portraits of rulers, no grand inscriptions announcing triumphs or dynasties. Their art shows processions, nature, dance, and ritual. It rarely depicts war. Because of this, many scholars believe that the throne may not have been designed for a king at all, but for a high priestess or a deity figure whose presence guided ceremonies. Minoan society gave prominence to female religious authority, and the frescoes suggest a world where power was expressed through ritual, not domination. The room itself reinforces this sense of ceremony. On the walls once stood vivid paintings of griffins, creatures of myth, part eagle and part lion, guardians of divinity. Their wings unfurled as though watching over the seat, suggesting that whoever sat there occupied a role connected to the spiritual or cosmological heart of the palace. The basin across the room may have held water used in purification rites, perhaps a symbolic threshold between everyday life and sacred responsibility. Knossos was not a fortress like those of mainland Greece. It had no defensive walls, no fortification towers. Its power lay in culture, trade, art, and ceremony. The throne room reflects that difference. It is intimate rather than imposing. The benches along the walls imply gathering, council, or participation, a group assembled not for military command but for shared ritual. The throne sits slightly elevated, not dominating but guiding, suggesting a society where authority flowed from tradition and symbolic order. The throne itself has survived fires, collapses, earthquakes, and the slow erosion of time. It is remarkable that such a fragile material as gypsum endured. The choice of stone was likely deliberate. Gypsum, when polished, gleams softly like bone or moonlight. It was associated with purity and divine presence in many ancient cultures. In Knossos, it may have symbolized the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of gods. When the palace fell into ruin, whether through natural disaster or external conflict, the throne remained anchored in its place. Dust and ash gathered around it, but the stone did not break. Later civilizations passed through Crete, building their own cities and leaving their own ruins, yet none disturbed its quiet authority. It sat unchanged while centuries turned. The significance of the throne extends beyond symbolism. It reflects a moment in human development when societies moved from temporary power to structured leadership, when roles became defined, rituals formalized, and architecture mirrored a deeper sense of order. The throne marks a transition between community gatherings around simple hearths and the creation of complex ceremonial spaces that shaped social identity. The broader palace of Knossos adds to the context. Its corridors twist like pathways of memory. Light wells illuminate staircases that descend into shadows. Storerooms hold huge clay jars for oil and grain. Frescoes depict saffron gatherers, bull leapers, priestesses in flowing garments. The architecture feels alive, an organism of stone. The throne room sits at its heart, positioned not for political domination but for ritual centrality. It is the pulse of the entire structure. To imagine the room in its prime is to sense a world filled with sound. Sandals on stone, murmurs of counsel, the quiet rhythm of ceremonial speech. The air rich with incense. Griffins bright on the walls, their wings shimmering. The throne lit by flickering firelight as a figure, perhaps a priestess, takes her place. Not to rule with force but to embody the spiritual center of the community. Even in its stillness today, the throne holds that echo. There is something remarkably human in its shape, a design fitted for the body, not for spectacle. It reminds us that ancient power did not always manifest through displays of wealth or dominance. Sometimes it appeared in humility, in the disciplined silence of ritual. The stone throne of Knossos is not only Europe's oldest throne, it is one of its most evocative. It bridges myth and archaeology, suggesting connections between the Minoan world and the legends that would later flourish in Greek memory. Stories of labyrinths, priestesses, and kings whose authority came not from violence but from the mysteries of the earth and sky. It remains in its chamber still, a survivor of time. A witness to an age when Crete stood at the center of Aegean culture, simple, unadorned, and eternal. The throne carries the calm dignity of a civilization that mastered beauty, harmony, and ceremony, long before the world around it learned to build in stone. The hidden tombs of Drawa, Abu el-Naga. At the northern edge of the Theban necropolis, where the cliffs of the west bank rise above the Nile in soft ochre layers, lies a place that once held the secrets of Egypt's forgotten nobility. To walk there is to feel the quiet of 1,000 years pressing through the dust, a silence broken only by the shifting wind. This is Drawa Abu el-Naga, a landscape of unmarked doorways, hidden shafts, and tombs carved into the earth long before the Valley of the Kings became the center of royal burial. Drawa Abu el-Naga is older, more intimate, and in many ways more mysterious. It stretches across a sloping hillside facing the river, its entrances barely visible, like breaths held beneath stone. Generations of Theban nobles, priests, scribes, and guardians of temples once chose this place for their eternal homes. Their lives, inscribed onto the walls of their tombs, reveal a world of administration, ritual, and devotion, the machinery that kept ancient Egypt functioning behind the grandeur of its pharaohs. Unlike the monumental tombs of kings, these chambers were not carved for spectacle, they were carved for memory. The people buried here served during Egypt's most transformative eras, the Middle Kingdom, the Second Intermediate Period, and the rise of the New Kingdom. Their titles tell a story. Overseers of granaries, priests of Amun, guardians of royal workshops, commanders of troops, artisans who crafted sacred statues. In their lives, they stood close to power. In their deaths, they rested in quiet rooms beneath the Theban cliffs. The entrances to these tombs are modest, small stone facades, sometimes half-collapsed, sometimes no more than a rectangular shadow in the hillside. But inside, the chambers expand into passageways, halls, and burial rooms painted with scenes that once glowed with color. Even in their faded state, they retain the grace of ancient hands, brushstrokes of blue, red and black forming images of offerings, boats on the river, plowing fields, and rituals that guided the dead into the next world. Many of these tombs were cut during times of political uncertainty. When Egypt was divided between northern and southern kingdoms, Thebes rose as a center of resistance, culture, and spiritual authority. Dra Abu el-Naga became a burial ground for those who supported this rise. Nobles who served Theban rulers before Egypt was reunited. Some tombs contain multiple burials, stacked across generations, their wooden coffins decorated with protective spells and painted faces meant to greet eternity. Excavation revealed traces of a remarkable continuity. Even as dynasties changed, families returned to the same shafts, adding chambers, repainting walls, carving new niches for their descendants. This layering makes the necropolis a living archive, not of kings but of lineages. The customs of one era blend with the next. Early coffins stand beside later ones. Offering tables carved centuries apart lie in the same chamber. Each edition reflects an evolving belief system that still retained its core, that death was not an ending, but a journey requiring preparation, care, and remembrance. The tombs also preserve rare glimpses of life beyond the palace, scenes of daily work, musical performances, banquets, and gardens. Some walls show scribes recording harvests, while others show women weaving, men fishing, or priests performing rites. These images form a bridge between ordinary life and sacred duty, suggesting that for the Egyptians, the mundane and the divine were never far apart. One of the most intriguing features of Drata Abu al-Naga is the presence of early burials connected to the rise of the 17th dynasty, the line of rulers who eventually expelled the Hyksos and reunified Egypt. Several princes, queens, and lesser royals of this turbulent era were interred here, their tombs blending into the larger fabric of the necropolis. Among them, fragments of weapons, ceremonial staffs, and royal regalia were discovered, objects that once belonged to families who shaped Egypt's future. The site also yielded wooden coffins decorated with bold, geometric designs characteristic of the period. The paint, though worn, still holds a deep, earthy warmth, reds mixed with ochre, blacks lined with white. These coffins feature protective deities, hieroglyphic spells, and eyes painted on the exterior so that the deceased could watch the sunrise each morning. In deeper chambers, archaeologists uncovered burial shafts lined with debris from ancient flooding and collapse. Yet beneath the sand, the remains of elaborate funerary equipment survived: bead necklaces, amulets shaped like hearts, scarabs inscribed with prayers, and small wooden figurines meant to serve the dead in the afterlife. Pottery jars once filled with food and oils lined the walls, a reminder that death required provision, not abandonment. Some chambers reveal a different story, traces of hurried burials. During times of conflict, families may have placed bodies quickly, returning later to complete rituals. Evidence of such urgency, scattered bones, partially decorated coffins, unfinished carvings, tells of a society adapting to crisis, yet holding firmly to belief. Deeper still, hidden behind false walls or beneath rubble, lie shafts that descend into darkness. These vertical tunnels, some more than 10 meters deep, lead to secondary chambers where later generations place their dead. The light fades quickly, replaced by cool air and the smell of ancient dust. Inside, the silence is absolute, a silence that seems less like absence and more like presence, as if the walls themselves remember. What makes Dra Abu el-Naga so compelling is not only its scale, but its humanity. These tombs do not echo with the ambitions of kings. They reflect the lives of those who worked, worshipped, wrote, and built. The administrators who kept temples functioning, the artisans who carved statues, the priests who recited prayers at dawn. Their tombs honor duty, not triumph. Yet the care put into them rivaled royal burials in devotion. As centuries passed, shifting sands concealed the entrances, hiding doors beneath drifts of desert dust. Some tombs collapsed, others survived untouched, their contents sealed by time. When the first chambers were opened in modern excavations, the scenes inside felt like conversations paused mid-sentence. Colors preserved beneath layers of soot, inscriptions intact where light had never reached. The necropolis stretches far beyond what is visible, its complexity still unfolding. Every newly discovered chamber adds another strand to the story. New names, new titles, new glimpses of ritual. The tombs weave a portrait of Thebes not just as a place of kings but as a city of memory, where thousands of lives sought continuity beyond death. To stand at the entrance of a Dra Abu el-Naga tomb is to feel the stillness of a world that understood death with remarkable clarity. The Egyptians believed that memory was a second life, that as long as names endured, so did the spirits they belonged to. These tombs, carved quietly into desert hillsides, were not meant to dazzle, they were meant to last. And they have. Beneath layers of dust and silence, the hidden tombs of Dra Abu el-Naga continue to hold their stories. Not grand stories of conquest, but intimate ones of devotion, work, and family. Together, they remind us that the foundation of every civilization lies not only in its rulers, but in the countless hands that carried its weight, hands that left behind chambers of stone to keep their memory alive, long after the desert reclaimed the world above. The Lost Tunnels of Lalibela. Hidden high in the northern highlands of Ethiopia lies one of the world's most extraordinary sacred landscapes, the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, carved straight from the living stone of the mountain. These monolithic temples, shaped from the top down, have long been known for their architectural wonder, but beneath them, concealed beneath centuries of dust and silence, lies something even more mysterious. An underground maze of tunnels, passages, and chambers that twist beneath the earth like forgotten arteries. These tunnels, some narrow and twisting, others tall enough for several people to walk side by side, are carved with the same care as the churches above them. They run from shrine to shrine, emerging in hidden courtyards, disappearing again into darkness, and linking the sacred complex into a single subterranean world. For generations, priests and pilgrims whispered of these passages, but their full extent is still uncertain, a network built with purpose, yet whose purpose remains quietly unresolved. Lalibela's origins reach back nearly 9 centuries, to the reign of King Lalibela of the Zagwe dynasty. According to Ethiopian tradition, he envisioned a new Jerusalem, a sacred refuge carved into the mountain during a time when pilgrimage to the Holy Land was dangerous. The result was a cluster of churches unlike anything the world had seen. Roofs level with the ground, walls carved downward, windows and doors emerging from the rock as if from memory. Yet these extraordinary structures represent only half of the story. What lies beneath them suggests a vision deeper and more complex than the churches alone reveal. The tunnels mirror the spiritual journey of a pilgrim, dark passages symbolizing trials and transformation, leading to chambers of light. Some run straight, lit faintly by shafts from the surface. Others curve sharply, plunging into utter blackness. The walls bear the texture of hand-carved strokes, long controlled cuts made by artisans who worked in silence. Steps descend into narrow corridors, then rise abruptly into alcoves and hidden chapels. Every turn suggests intention, nothing is random. In several places, the tunnels connect to caves that hold shallow niches, perhaps once used to store manuscripts, relics, or offerings. In others, side chambers open into quiet hollowed rooms where monks may have lived, prayed, or kept vigil. These underground spaces carry a stillness that feels older than the churches themselves. The air is cool, dry, and heavy with the scent of dust and earth, a world carved for reflection and mystery. Some tunnels served practical roles, guiding pilgrims, separating sacred routes from everyday movement, or offering protection from conflict. Others appear symbolic, pathways that force the traveler to bow, crawl, or pause. In Ethiopian Christian tradition, spiritual movement is physical. The act of passing through darkness before emerging into the light of a sanctuary reflects inner transformation. The tunnels of Lalibela seem built around this idea, designed to guide the soul as much as the feet, and yet there are features that suggest purposes beyond ritual. Deep beneath the complex lies a long, unusually straight corridor, carved with precision. Its walls are smooth, its ceiling even. It leads to a chamber cut with a kind of architectural clarity uncommon in other parts of the site. The chamber contains a raised platform, perhaps once holding something of importance, an object, a relic, or a ceremonial function now forgotten. The placement and shape of this room remain among the site's quietest puzzles. Elsewhere, narrow channels run along the base of the walls, guiding water from unseen sources. These could have been part of a drainage system, but their careful shaping suggests symbolic or ritual use as well. Water in Ethiopian Christian tradition holds deep meaning, representing purification and renewal. The tunnels seem to echo this concept, allowing water to move through the earth as devotion moves through the human heart. As centuries passed, the landscape above shifted. Churches were repaired and repainted, walls reinforced, courtyards reshaped, yet the tunnels remained almost untouched. The world above changed. The world below endured. Pilgrims continued to use parts of the network, walking through darkness toward the sound of drums, chanting, and incense drifting down from the churches above. But much of the maze fell out of common knowledge. Entrances collapsed, passages filled with soil, and memory faded. To walk the surviving tunnels is to sense the layers of emotion they once held. Footsteps echo softly, swallowed by stone. The walls seem to absorb sound, creating a silence that feels alive. At times the darkness is so complete that one can only move by touch, running a hand along the carved rock, feeling the grooves left by tools centuries ago. Then, suddenly, the tunnel opens into light, into a courtyard where a cross is carved into a wall, or into the base of a monolithic church rising above like a mountain of devotion. The connection between above and below is deliberate. The churches are arranged in symbolic groups, earthly Jerusalem, heavenly Jerusalem, and the tunnels mirror this order. They guide the pilgrim from outer courtyards to inner sanctuaries, from public spaces to places of deep quiet. The tunnels are not mere passages, they are part of the theology of space, representing trials, humility, and enlightenment. Their design is not ornamented, but purposeful. an architecture of feeling. The people who carved them worked with chisels, hammers, and an unwavering sense of purpose. The labor required was immense. To carve tunnels through solid volcanic tuff, aligning them precisely with the churches above, demanded both vision and cooperation. This was not the work of a single generation. It was a craft passed from master to apprentice, formed through discipline and devotion. Yet even with such knowledge, some puzzles remain. Certain tunnels lead nowhere, ending abruptly in solid walls. Were they abandoned, or were the passages meant to represent spiritual boundaries, a reminder that some paths are not for all? Hidden niches contain stone benches, as if used for contemplation. Some tunnels are surprisingly tall for medieval construction, suggesting that the builders anticipated large gatherings. Others are extremely narrow, forcing a single person to move alone in silence. The underground labyrinth of Lalibela is a story not of lost treasure, but of lost purpose. The builders left no inscriptions, no explanations. All that remains is form, and through form, meaning. The tunnels feel less like engineering, and more like ritual made solid, a blueprint for spiritual journeying. When dawn rises over Lalibela, light spills across the carved roofs of the churches, but the tunnels remain in shadow. Yet beneath that shadow lies the deeper heart of the complex. A world shaped by hands that believed stone could carry faith, memory, and mystery into the future. The lost tunnels of Lalibela remain one of the most compelling enigmas in sacred architecture. They are not merely paths, they are experiences. They represent a way of thinking in which devotion is carved into the earth itself, guiding pilgrims through darkness and silence towards something unseen, but deeply felt. And though centuries have passed, the tunnels still invite the same journey, a descent into the quiet world beneath the mountain, where stone walls hold stories too old for words, and where the air itself seems to hum with the faith of those who once shaped this labyrinth by hand, believing that some truths must be approached not in light, but through silence. The anthropomorphic stelae of Arabia, Alula. Across the sandstone valleys of northwestern Arabia, where the desert stretches in long silent waves, and the wind moves softly over ancient trails, archaeologists uncovered figures that seem to watch from the dawn of time, tall, flat stones carved into the shapes of human beings. These are the anthropomorphic stelae of Saudi Arabia, some more than 8,000 years old, standing long before pyramids or written language, long before the idea of civilization took root across the Old World. Scattered across Alula, Taima, Qarayat al-Kafa, and other sites in the northern Arabian Peninsula, these stelae are among the oldest life-sized human representations ever found. They stand between 1 and 2 meters tall, with carved belts, daggers, shoulders, and faces rendered in simple but deliberate lines. Most show a human torso, arms indicated by subtle curves, and a stylized face, 2 eyes and a nose carved in relief. Their bodies are shaped to evoke presence, not perfection. Even in their simplicity, they feel alive. The desert that surrounds them was once a different world. 8,000 years ago, Arabia was greener, a landscape of pastures, seasonal lakes, and migrating herds. Nomadic groups moved through these valleys, leaving behind traces of settlements, tools, and rituals. The stelae belonged to that world, a time when early pastoralists and hunter-gatherers shaped stone not for shelter or weapons, but for meaning. Each stele begins as a block of sandstone quarried from nearby cliffs. The stone was shaped using hammerstones, then smoothed and carved with precision. Many feature a belt carved around the waist, often with a dagger tucked into it. Some show a diagonal sash across the chest. Others have carefully outlined shoulders or a collarbone suggested through shallow carving. The faces are perhaps the most striking aspect, 2 circular eyes and a central ridge for the nose, sometimes raised, sometimes simply incised. No mouth appears on any of them, giving them a quiet, watchful expression. To create such figures required planning and cooperation. Moving a slab weighing hundreds of kilograms demanded coordination, carving it into a form that would stand upright demanded skill. These figures were placed carefully within cemeteries, near cairns, or at ritual gathering sites. They were not random markers, but focal points of community memory, standing for individuals whose names and stories have been lost, or for spirits that guided the living. Scholars believe the stelae may have represented ancestors, leaders, or protective spirits. Their presence across thousands of kilometers suggests a shared tradition spanning generations, an identity rooted not in architecture or writing, but in stone. To early Arabian societies, memory was carved, not recorded. Presence was shaped, not written. The stelae found in Alula and the surrounding region display remarkable craftsmanship. Some carry deep carvings that still catch the desert light. Others bear faint traces of decorations worn by time. A few have multiple layers of carving, suggesting reuse or rededication over centuries. Many were intentionally placed near burial landscapes, fields of cairns stretching along ridges and plateaus, forming some of the oldest necropolis systems in Arabia. These burial fields were not isolated graves but organized landscapes of remembrance. The stelae stood among them as silent witnesses, marking not only death but the continuity of community. In the quietness of the desert, they formed a dialogue between generations, a way for the living to feel the presence of those who shaped the land before them. Some stelae come from Qaryat al-Khafa, a site where dozens were discovered aligned along ancient pathways. Others emerged from the black desert of Taima, where volcanic stones contrast sharply with pale sandstone carvings. Each region shows slight variations, different belt styles, dagger shapes, or proportions, yet all share the same essential form. This unity across distance suggests that the tradition was widespread, connected by shared rituals and beliefs. When examined closely, the figures reveal details that tie them to daily life. The belts and daggers reflect the tools and symbols of early Arabian societies, where personal items held both practical and symbolic roles. A dagger was not just a weapon, but a marker of status, identity, and adulthood. To carve it on a stele was to encode memory, a sign of who the figure represented and what they meant to their people. The absence of a mouth on the faces has long intrigued scholars. Some interpret it as a stylistic choice. Others see it as symbolic silence, a reminder that the figure's role was not to speak, but to watch, to guard, to endure. In many ancient traditions, ancestors were invoked through sight rather than voice. Their presence was felt through icons rather than words. The stelae reflect this understanding. They look back at the viewer, calm and timeless. The landscape itself adds to their power. Alula's sandstone cliffs hold layers of petroglyphs, scenes of hunting, dancing, herding, carved by the same ancestors who shaped the stelae. Together they form an open-air record of human presence stretching back tens of thousands of years. The stelae stand within this record like signposts of identity, emerging from the same hands that shaped the earliest images of Arabian life. Over time, shifting sands buried many of the stelae. Some toppled, others remained upright but were forgotten as nomadic routes changed. When archaeologists uncovered them, their surfaces still carried the soft polish of desert wind. The carvings, though simple, retained their clarity, evidence of the stone's resilience and the patience of its creators. The rediscovery of these figures reshaped the understanding of Arabia's deep past. They showed that long before the rise of major civilizations in the region, centuries before Dadian, Taima, or the Nabateans, communities here were already creating symbolic art at a monumental scale. They were shaping images of themselves and their ancestors, grounding their identity in stone even as their lives moved with the seasons. To stand before one of the anthropomorphic stelae is to face a presence that feels both intimate and distant. The eyes, carved in simple circles, seem to meet your own. The straight posture suggests dignity. The belt and dagger hint at a lived life, someone who walked these valleys, tended animals, shared meals, and became memory. Yet the anonymity of the figures gives them universality. They are not individuals, but ancestors of all who passed through these lands. Their faces are minimal, so that identity remains open, a shared humanity rather than a portrait. The stelae of Arabia remind us that the earliest expressions of memory were not stories or inscriptions but forms, stone shaped into the human outline, placed where the living could see it and feel continuity. In a world without writing, these figures were a language of presence. The anthropomorphic stelae of Alula stand now as some of the oldest guardians of human memory. Carved in a landscape once green and vibrant, they endure in the quiet of the desert, holding the echo of lives lived thousands of years ago. They are the desert's oldest storytellers, not in words but in form, in posture, in the steady gaze of stone that has watched the passing of seasons for 8 millennia. The megalithic tombs of Pulnabrone, Ireland. On a lonely stretch of Ireland's limestone wilderness, where the wind whistles across cracked stone and nothing casts a shadow for long, stands a monument older than the pyramids, a structure so stark and skeletal that it seems less built than revealed. This is Pulnabrone, a megalithic portal tomb rising from the heart of the Burren, a place where the ground breaks open into ancient fractures and time settles into the rock. From a distance, the tomb is a silhouette, a slab balanced on 2 uprights, a door into silence. Up close, it becomes something far deeper, a doorway to a world that vanished 5,000 years ago. Pulnabrone was raised during the Neolithic era, sometime between 3800 and 3200 BCE, when farming communities first took root across Ireland. These were people who carved meaning into landscape, aligning their lives with stone, sky, and memory. In a region where soil is sparse and limestone dominates the horizon, they chose this exposed plateau as the resting place for their dead. Today the tomb stands alone, but once it would have been a center of gathering, a place where generations came to honor those who came before. The architecture is deceptively simple. A massive capstone, weighing more than 10 tons, rests on upright portal stones that taper inward like the entrance to a chamber. Beneath it, a narrow passage leads to what was once a burial space carved into the bedrock. The stones are angled with intention, their surfaces weathered by millennia of wind and rain. The structure leans ever so slightly, yet remains unbroken, balanced with ancient precision. It is both fragile and immovable, a paradox of endurance. When archaeologists excavated the site, they found the remains of more than 30 individuals, men, women, and children. Their bones were fragmented, placed deliberately, as if part of a collective ritual. Some had signs of arthritis, tooth wear, and injuries healed long before death, evidence of long lives lived through hardship. Among the remains were small offerings, beads, bone tools, worked flint, fragments of pottery. These were tokens of remembrance, objects meant to accompany the dead on a journey the living could not follow. The tomb rests on the Burren, a landscape unique in all of Europe. Its limestone pavement stretches for kilometers, split by deep fissures called grikes and dotted with wildflowers that bloom against all logic. This terrain would have looked much the same in the Neolithic world. The people who built Poulnabrone lived in homes of wood and thatch, long gone now, their settlements erased by time. But the tomb survived because it was carved from what the land offered, slabs cut by nature's hand, shaped by human will. Why they built it here remains uncertain. Some believe the tomb was aligned with celestial events, its stones angled toward significant points in the yearly cycle. Others think the choice was symbolic. The Burren itself may have been considered a threshold between worlds, a place where the veil between the living and the dead felt thinner. The ground beneath the tomb dips into a natural fissure, almost like an underworld entrance. The builders may have believed the spirits of their ancestors could travel through this place, moving between the earth and whatever lay beyond. The act of building Poulnabrone would have required planning, cooperation, and reverence. The stones were not lightly chosen. Each slab had to be moved across uneven ground using ropes, wooden rollers, and sheer strength. The capstone in particular demanded unity, dozens of hands lifting, guiding, and anchoring it into place. The achievement was not simply architectural, it was communal. It revealed a society that valued ritual, memory, and the continuity of lineage. The bones found inside the chamber showed signs of repeated disturbance, as though the tomb was opened and reopened over centuries. This suggests Poulnabrone was not a single burial, but a long-lasting ancestral site. The people returned to it again and again, adding new remains, moving older ones aside to make room. These actions were not careless. They were part of a belief system that saw death as transition, not finality. The dead were not forgotten, they were companions. Artifacts found near the tomb reflect the subtlety of Neolithic life. A polished stone axe, worn from use, placed beside a body. A pottery sherd decorated with a simple geometric pattern. A child's bone bead. These items hint at stories now lost. A father marking a burial with his tool. A mother placing a keepsake beside a child. A tribe honoring its elders with objects tied to their lives. The tomb became a chronicle of generations, its stones absorbing the weight of memory. The Burren's environment preserved the site in unexpected ways. The winds that scour the plateau prevented soil from covering the tomb. Rain, flowing through limestone channels, eroded the ground but left the slab structure exposed. Over thousands of years, the tomb remained visible, watching the seasons turn. It became part of the landscape, as permanent as the hills, as present as the sky. Even in its weathered state, Poulnabrone carries an unmistakable atmosphere. The capstone seems to float above its supports, a stone horizon suspended in midair. Beneath it, the shadows deepen, giving the impression of an opening, a passage that narrows into darkness. The wind moving through the stones produces a low hum, a natural resonance that deepens the quiet. Standing before it, one feels the presence of those who built it, not as ghosts, but as distant echoes of human intention. The simplicity of the monument is deceptive. It required knowledge of balance and weight distribution. Each supporting stone was shaped to bear pressure without collapsing. The angle of the capstone was adjusted so water would flow away, preventing erosion from undermining the structure. These choices reveal an intuitive engineering, not written in plans or measured by tools, but passed down through experience. And yet the mystery remains. Why did they choose this form? A portal, a threshold, a doorway. Dolmens across Europe share this design, suggesting shared beliefs about death and continuity. The portal may have symbolized a passage to another world. The capstone could have represented the sky, sheltering the spirits beneath it. The chamber might have been a womb of earth, returning the dead to the mother from which all life emerged. The people who built Poulnabrone were neither primitive nor aimless. They were observant, spiritual, skilled. They carved a monument that survived long after their language, art, and homes dissolved. Their tomb endures where their world did not. And in that endurance, it speaks of identity, of community, of the oldest emotion humanity carries, the need to remember. The megalithic tomb of Poulnabrone stands as a quiet anchor in the Irish landscape, a stone held open to the sky. It is a place where the past rests not in fragments but in unity, where bones, rituals, and stones merge into a story of resilience. It reminds us that long before metal or writing, people were already building for eternity, already giving shape to the invisible, already honoring the connection between the living and the dead. And as the light moves across the Burren, turning the limestone white in the morning and silver at dusk, the tomb remains unchanged, a threshold carved into time, holding the memory of a world long gone, but not forgotten. The volcanic stone figures of San Agustin. Across the green highlands of southern Colombia, where clouds drift low over the mountains and rivers cut deep through volcanic earth, lies a landscape filled with stone guardians, hundreds of them, carved from hardened lava, watching in silence over a world that long ago moved on. This is San Agustin, a place where ancient sculptors left behind one of the largest concentrations of megalithic statues in the Americas. They left no writing, no living descendants, no clear explanation for their work. Only the figures remain, expressive, powerful, and hauntingly human. The statues stand scattered across hillsides and valleys, some towering above the ground, others half buried beneath grass and soil. They depict faces with wide eyes, tight mouths, and solemn expressions. Some portray warriors holding clubs or staffs. Others show supernatural beings, part human, part animal, standing in poses that suggest ritual or command. Many guard tombs, their bodies placed to watch over the dead. A few smile, most do not. Their presence feels ancient, deliberate, and deeply rooted in a belief system we no longer understand. The culture that carved them flourished more than 2,000 years ago, in the Andean foothills near the upper Magdalena River. This region was rich in volcanic stone, and it was here that early sculptors learned to shape it with extraordinary mastery. Using stone hammers and tools harder than the basalt they carved, they created intricate figures, some weighing several tons, their surfaces smoothed with patience that must have taken weeks or months. The statues often combine human and animal features, fanged mouths, jaguar eyes, bird-like headdresses. These blended forms hint at a worldview where humans and nature were intertwined, where power was drawn from animals, spirits, and the land itself. San Agustin is also a place of tombs, large burial mounds covered by massive slab roofs, supported by carved pillars. Archaeologists believe the statues were placed to guard these burial chambers, standing as protectors or guides for the souls of the dead. Inside some tombs, archaeologists found offerings, ceramic vessels, tools, gold ornaments, and objects that may have been symbols of leadership. These items suggest a society with distinct social roles: rulers, priests, warriors, though the exact hierarchy remains unknown. The sculptors gave each statue a presence that feels intentional. Many hold objects pressed to their chests, knives, staffs, or sacred bundles. Others sit in crouched positions, as if waiting for something. A few appear in pairs, one large figure guarding a smaller one. In some carvings, figures cradle infants or animals. The gestures are simple, but the emotion they convey is unmistakable. These were not decorative works, they were created with ritual purpose, connected to ancestors, deities, or cosmic order. One of the most striking features is the consistency of style. Despite the vast number of sculptures the people of San Agustin carved for centuries, yet their approach remained unified: broad faces, deep-set eyes, symmetrical bodies, and clear lines. This continuity suggests a long-held tradition, passed down through generations of artisans, each learning from the last. The statues may have formed part of a ceremonial landscape, where people walked among carved guardians during rituals involving life, death, and renewal. The volcanic landscape seems to have influenced the sculptures themselves. The region's soil is dark and fertile, fed by ancient eruptions. Volcanoes, with their unpredictable force, often played a role in early religious beliefs. The people of San Agustin may have viewed the earth as alive, a source of creation and destruction. Carving statues from volcanic stone could have been a way of honoring that power, giving form to forces beneath the ground. Some figures even show exaggerated fangs or eyes, as if portraying beings born from fire and earth. The positioning of statues across the region is also remarkable. Some stand on high ridges with sweeping views of the mountains. Others are grouped around ceremonial plazas, their arrangement suggesting intentional design. A few lie toppled or partially buried, as though nature slowly reclaimed them. In places where the forest has regrown, figures emerge unexpectedly from the undergrowth, ancient faces looking out from between roots and vines, untouched for centuries. One of the most impressive collections lies at the Fuente de Lavapatas, a sacred spring carved directly into the rock bed of a stream. Channels, pools, and figures were sculpted into the volcanic stone, turning the water into a ritual path. As the stream flowed through faces and symbols, it transformed into something sacred, a living representation of purification, birth, and the passage from one state to another. The combination of water and stone shows a deep understanding of nature's symbolism, as if the people believed that rituals should take place where earth and water met. Despite decades of research, the identity of the sculptors remains uncertain. They left no texts, no codices, no surviving oral traditions. Their culture faded long before European contact, leaving only the carvings as testimony. Some scholars link them to early Andean cultures influenced by Amazonian traditions. Others see unique local development. The absence of written records turns every statue into a question, not just of technique, but of meaning. What remains clear is the emotional weight the sculptures carry. The eyes, often carved as deep ovals or slits, seem to hold a quiet intensity. The figures look both ancient and alive, as if participating in ceremonies that never truly ended. Even the smallest statues, no more than a meter tall, radiate the same solemn calm as the largest guardians. It is a rare experience in archaeology, encountering artifacts that feel not merely old but purposeful, as if they still hold a role to play. Some statues suggest themes of duality, life and death, human and animal, earth and sky. The people of San Agustin may have viewed existence as a constant exchange between different realms. The sculptures embody this merging, blending forms and symbols into a single expression of belief. Standing among them, one senses a worldview where boundaries were fluid, where a figure could be both ancestor and deity, both protector and participant. In the broader landscape, the statues form a silent conversation. They face different directions, watching horizons, valleys, ancient paths. They stand alone or in groups, each placement contributing to the sacred geography. Walking through the site, a visitor senses that the arrangement was ritualistic, aligned with traditions we can only partially reconstruct. The orators of stone speak through posture and presence, not words. The volcanic stone figures of San Agustin endure not because they are mysterious, but because they are human, carved by hands that understood both stone and spirit. They remain rooted in the earth, holding a connection between past and present. Their creators are long gone, their stories fragmented, but their sculptures still stand, carrying the weight of memory, belief, and a vision of the world shaped by nature, ritual, and time. In the quiet valleys of San Agustin, the stone guardians continue their vigil, their faces calm beneath passing clouds. They remind us that even without writing, a civilization can speak across millennia, not through words but through form, presence, and the enduring patience of stone. The face of Borzone, stone monument, Italy. Deep in the rugged hills of Liguria, northern Italy, there is a valley where silence feels older than the forests that surround it. The slopes are steep, covered in chestnut trees and moss-darkened stone, and hidden among them is one of Europe's strangest and least understood monuments, a colossal human face carved directly into the cliffside. Measuring nearly 23 feet tall, the so-called face of Borzone rises from the rock like a guardian left to watch over the valley long after its makers disappeared. No inscriptions mark its edges, no records explain its purpose. Only the carved eyes, nose, and mouth remain, weathered, solemn, and impossibly still. For centuries, villagers living nearby spoke of the face as if it had always been there, older than memory, older than the churches and farms scattered through the valley. Some believed it represented a forgotten deity, others said it was a warning. A few whispered that it was never carved at all, but revealed, as if the mountain itself once held a human spirit. When archaeologists first began to study the monument, they were struck not by ornament or detail, but by the scale. The carving is enormous, cut into a sheer wall of rock, accessible only by narrow paths. Its features are simple, even abstract, but unmistakably human. The nose projects sharply, the brows curve slightly downward, and the mouth forms a long, solemn line. Time has softened its edges, yet the expression remains intact, calm, watchful, enigmatic. The cliff into which it is carved is volcanic in origin, its stone tough and resistant. To shape it would have required heavy tools and coordinated labor, and that raises the central mystery: who carved the face, and when? Prehistoric cultures inhabited this region, thousands of years before written history, leaving behind tombs, tools, and mysterious standing stones. Some researchers believe the face of Borzone may belong to that era, perhaps as early as the Neolithic or Bronze Age. Others think it may be medieval, carved by hermits or monks seeking spiritual solitude. But no definitive date has ever been established, leaving the monument suspended between deep prehistory and forgotten medieval devotion. The surrounding landscape offers few clues. The valley is dotted with caves, springs, and natural shelters used by ancient peoples for millennia. It lies near routes once traveled by shepherds, traders, and pilgrims crossing the Apennine Mountains. It is the kind of place where rituals might have taken root, where stone could become symbol, and symbol could survive long after meaning was lost. Approaching the monument feels like walking into a different time. The forest muffles sound, and the stone face emerges gradually from shadow. At first it looks natural, an accidental shape formed by erosion. But as you come closer, the features sharpen. The mouth takes form, the eyes appear. The cliff becomes a presence, not just a surface. The effect is subtle but powerful, as if the stone were watching the valley, carrying a quiet awareness shaped by hands long gone. Some archaeologists see in the carving the hallmarks of prehistoric stelae, those early European stone monuments carved with human forms. The face of Borzone shares their simplicity, no ornamentation, no realistic detail, just a deliberate human outline, a suggestion of face rather than portrait. If the monument does belong to that tradition, it would be one of the largest of its kind ever discovered. Others point to the region's medieval history. Hermits and monastic groups once lived in these mountains, carving crosses and symbols into the stone. They sought solitude and spiritual reflection, and some shaped their surroundings into spaces for prayer. The face of Borzone, with its solemn expression, might have served as a marker or symbol for one of these communities, a reminder of humility and silent devotion. But the carving's erosion complicates the question. Its features are deeply weathered, smoothed by centuries of wind and rain. Some parts of the nose and jaw have begun to fade into the cliffside. That kind of wear suggests great age, more than just a few hundred years. Yet without datable materials, the monument remains unplaced in time, its creators unnamed. The stone itself provides another layer of mystery. The cliff shows no signs of scaffolding or carving platforms. The face rises from the rock at a height difficult to reach without significant preparation. Whoever carved it did so with intention and effort, shaping a human form so large it could be seen from across the valley. This suggests purpose, perhaps ritual, perhaps territorial, perhaps commemorative. But the absence of inscriptions leaves only speculation. What remains unmistakable is the human impulse behind it. Across cultures, across millennia, people carved faces into stone to preserve presence, to mark territory, to honor ancestors, to invoke protection. The face of Borzone carries that same impulse. It feels neither threatening nor benevolent, only watchful, as if holding a silent memory of those who once lived beneath it. When light falls across the monument at dawn, shadows settle into its carved lines, giving the face depth and expression. The valley brightens slowly, mist lifting from the trees, and the stone seems almost animate, not moving, but present in a way that suggests intention. At dusk, the face fades back into the rock, its features blending with the mountain, as if the boundary between sculpture and cliff were never meant to be fixed. For archaeologists, the monument represents a rare challenge, an ancient work of art with no context, no reference, no explanation. For the people of the region, it remains part of their landscape, a landmark that has witnessed generations pass. And for those who stand before it, the face raises a quiet question, not just who carved it, but why humans carve faces at all. Perhaps its purpose was simple, to remind those who walked this valley that they were not alone. Or perhaps it was a symbol of protection, meant to watch over fields and families. Or it may have been something more abstract, a way for early humans to imprint identity onto a world that often felt vast and uncertain. The face of Borzone endures not because its meaning is clear, but because it invites contemplation. It is a meeting point between stone and imagination, between landscape and memory, between the human desire to create and the forces that erase. As centuries continue to pass, the face remains, eroding slowly, watching silently, carrying with it a mystery carved not just into stone, but into time itself. The Lion of Hamadan, Iran. In the mountains of western Iran, where the air cools as it climbs and the wind carries the scent of stone and dust, stands a single monument that has watched the land for more than 2,000 years, the Lion of Hamadan. Half buried, broken, and worn by centuries of winter and sun, it remains one of the most enigmatic sculptures in the ancient Near East. There is no inscription to claim it, no surviving temple to explain it, yet the moment the carved face emerges from the slope of the hill, there is no mistaking its presence. Even in ruin, the lion feels alive, watching, guarding, remembering. Hamadan, one of the oldest continually inhabited cities in the world, was once known as Ecbatana, the capital of the Median and later Achaemenid empires. Kings passed through its gates, armies marched beneath its walls, and the city became a meeting place of cultures stretching from Anatolia to the Persian plateau. Somewhere within that world of palaces and fortresses, the lion was placed, not as decoration, but as a marker of significance. No one knows exactly when it was carved. Some scholars attribute it to the Median era around the 7th century BCE. Others link it to the early Achaemenid period, the time of Cyrus and Darius, when royal tombs and guardian beasts were common across the empire. But its style is unusual, not fully Persian, not fully Greek, and unlike anything found elsewhere in Iran. It seems to belong to a moment of transition, when influences blended and new ideas took shape. Carved from a single block of heavy stone, the statue once stood upright, its full form intact, a lion seated with its head raised, chest broad, and paws extended in the protective posture that ancient sculptors favored for guardian figures. Today, the upper half remains, the body fractured, the base lost beneath layers of soil. Yet even incomplete, its scale is unmistakable. Archaeologists estimate that in its original form, it would have been nearly 3 meters long and over 2 meters high, heavy enough to require dozens of workers to position. The lion's expression is one of calm authority. Its eyes, though eroded, seem to gaze past the centuries. The mouth is slightly open, frozen between breath and warning. Unlike the finely detailed lions of Babylon or Persepolis, this one is carved with softer lines, broader forms, and a sense of grounded simplicity. It was meant to project presence rather than ornament, an anchor carved into the earth itself. Local tradition holds that the lion once guarded the tomb of a king, perhaps a Median ruler, perhaps a general, perhaps someone whose name has long since vanished from memory. Guardian lions were placed at entrances to royal burial grounds across the ancient world, from Lydia to Assyria to Persia. They marked passage, strength, and protection. If Hamadan's lion once stood beside a tomb, then that tomb too is lost, buried beneath the shifting earth, or destroyed by time. The statue may be the last surviving marker of a burial complex now erased. Another legend speaks of Alexander the Great. Some historical accounts mention that when Alexander reached Ecbatana, he buried his beloved companion Hephaestion in the city and ordered a lion statue raised in his honor. This connection is debated, but the idea lingers because the lion's style does show faint traces of Hellenistic influence: the rounded mane, the softer form, the posture blending Greek naturalism with Persian symbolism. If this story holds any truth, the lion becomes more than a local guardian. It becomes a relic of grief from one of history's most legendary figures. But archaeology, cautious as ever, offers no certainty, no inscription, no date carved into stone, no accompanying architecture to anchor its story. Just a lion, alone, facing the wind. What is certain is the lion's symbolic endurance. In the ancient world, lions were more than animals. They were embodiments of royal power, cosmic order, and divine guardianship. The Persians associated the lion with kingship and the sun. The Medes saw it as a symbol of protection. To carve a lion was to carve authority into the landscape. Placed on high ground overlooking the city, the Hamadan lion would have watched over the valley, a silent sentinel linking earth to sky. Archaeological studies of the site reveal that the statue was once part of a pair, two lions facing each other, forming a monumental gateway. Only one remains, the other collapsed long ago. This strengthens the theory that the lions marked the entrance to a sacred or royal complex. Twin lions appear throughout ancient architecture as thresholds, points where the mortal world touches the realm of the revered. To pass between them was to enter a place of significance, protected and consecrated. The craftsmanship of the surviving lion shows both skill and intention. The stone is not local, it was transported from quarries outside the immediate area. The carving marks reveal deliberate shaping, broad strokes for structure, fine cuts for features that are now mostly lost. The workers who shaped the lion were trained artisans, likely part of a guild or royal workshop. Their methods reflect traditions shared across the Near East. Chisels of bronze or iron, abrasives for smoothing, wooden scaffolding for positioning. Every detail, even in erosion, carries the imprint of human hands that worked under orders and vision. Time has softened the statue's edges but deepened its meaning. Now exposed on a hillside, half broken, surrounded by nothing but scattered stones and murmurs of the past, the lion feels less like a guardian and more like a survivor. It has lived through empires, invasions, earthquakes, and centuries of neglect. Yet it remains upright, not in defiance but in endurance. To stand before it is to feel that endurance, the cool stone beneath sunlight, the quietness of the land, the sense that this lion has watched more years than any building around it. It is a reminder that even when names fade, forms endure. Even when cities fall, the stones continue to speak. Even when memory breaks, presence remains. The Lion of Hamadan is more than a sculpture. It is a witness to power, to loss, to time itself. A guardian without a tomb, a monument without a story, a piece of ancient strength still holding its place in the world. The standing stones of Callanish. On the wind-swept Isle of Lewis, far off the western coast of Scotland, a circle of ancient stones rises from the earth like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Dark, weathered, and unmoving, they stand against the Atlantic wind, as they have for more than 5,000 years. This is Callanish, one of the oldest and most haunting stone monuments in Europe, older even than Stonehenge, built long before metal, empire, or recorded history reached these shores. From a distance, the stones appear scattered at random, but as you approach, a pattern emerges. A central circle, radiating avenues, long processional lines reaching toward the horizon, each stone placed with intention, each aligned with something far greater than the landscape beneath it. Callanish is not simply a circle, it is a design, a calendar, a memory. And for the Neolithic people who built it, it was a place where earth and sky met in ritual. The stones themselves are made of Louisian gneiss, some of the oldest rock on earth. Many stand more than 12 feet tall, tapering like natural pillars carved by time. Their surfaces glint with quartz, catching faint light even on cloudy days. To lift them from the ground, transport them across uneven terrain, and set them upright in sockets carved from the soil would have required immense effort. Dozens of people, ropes, levers, and a shared purpose rooted in belief. Archaeologists often refer to Callanish as a ceremonial landscape, not a single monument, but an entire region shaped for ritual. Smaller circles, burial cairns, and alignments spread across the nearby hills. Together they form a network of sacred markers connected by sightlines and celestial events. In the Neolithic imagination, these stones were not inert objects. They were living anchors that tied human life to the rhythm of the heavens. One of the most striking features of Callanish is its astronomical alignment. The central avenue of stones points directly toward the setting moon during the major lunar standstill, a rare event that occurs roughly once every 19 years. On that night, the moon skims low across the horizon, seeming to glide along the outline of the distant hills before settling between the stones. For the people who built the site, this movement would not have been a coincidence, but a revelation, proof that the sky followed a pattern, one that could be mapped and honored. The landscape amplifies the experience. The hills surrounding Callanish form a silhouette that later folklore would call the Sleeping Beauty, a shape resembling a reclining figure. When the moon dips across this outline during the lunar standstill, it appears to rise from the figure's body. To the ancient people, such an alignment would have held deep symbolic meaning: rebirth, renewal, and the cyclical nature of existence. No written records survive from the builders of Callanish. Their language, rituals, and worldview must be reconstructed through stone, soil, and the faint traces of their dwellings. Excavations revealed pottery fragments, hearths, and the foundations of roundhouses, signs of a small but enduring community. Life here was simple, ruled by seasons and survival. Yet amidst that simplicity, they conceived something monumental: a cathedral of open sky, a temple of stone. Burials found near the site hint that Callanish may have been both a meeting place and a place of passage. Cremated remains mixed with charcoal suggest ritual fires and gatherings. The people who stood here looked to the horizon for guidance, marking time not by clocks but by the steady dance of the moon, the sun, and the stars. For them, the stones were not relics. They were instruments, tools through which the community could understand its place in a vast, ever-turning world. As centuries passed, the original purpose of the monument faded. The Bronze Age saw the filling in of a burial cairn at the center, suggesting changing beliefs. Later generations built homes near the stones, plowed fields around them, and created new stories. Some believed the stones were once giants turned to rock for refusing to convert to faith. Others saw them as guardians, watching over the island through storms and silence. What is striking is how the stones continue to command presence. Even now, standing among them, one feels the weight of time, not as burden, but as continuity. The wind carries the same salt from the sea. The clouds move in familiar patterns. The stones, unchanged, hold on to centuries of weather, ritual, and memory. Each one leans slightly differently, shaped by the ground beneath it. Together they form a circle that feels both ancient and alive. The placement of each stone reveals a delicate balance between practical effort and spiritual intention. Their arrangement suggests a culture attuned to cycles, lunar phases, solstices, harvests. In societies without written calendars, such structures were essential. They allowed communities to measure seasons, predict celestial events, and schedule ceremonies. But the scale and artistry of Callanish show that it meant more than marking time. It embodied belief, identity, and shared purpose. To walk through the avenues at dusk is to feel part of something older than civilization itself. The stones cast long shadows across the grass, merging with the lines carved by ancient hands. Light softens their edges, revealing textures shaped by thousands of winters. The silence becomes a kind of language, steady, timeless, patient. Callanish stands not as a ruin, but as a reminder. It reminds us that even in prehistory, people were already observing the heavens, carving their understanding into stone, and seeking connection with something larger than themselves. The stones hint at a world where ritual guided life, where community effort created permanence, and where time was measured in cycles rather than years. The standing stones of Callanish endure because they were not built for a moment, they were built for continuity. Their purpose may be partly lost, but their presence remains clear. They speak through alignment, shadow, and silence. They remind us that the human desire to understand the universe is not new, it is ancient, woven into our earliest attempts to shape meaning from the world. And as the Atlantic winds continue to move across the stones, they stand as they always have, watching the horizon, marking the heavens, and holding the memory of a people who carved their place in time, using nothing but earth, sky, and stone. The megalithic fort of Gathasphaya, Jordan. Across the rugged highlands of southern Jordan, where wind carves long shadows across weathered cliffs, sits a place almost unknown outside archaeology. The megalithic fort of Gathasphaya. It is a ruin built from stone blocks so large and so precisely fitted that they seem out of scale with the landscape around them. Towers rise in broken silhouettes. Walls stretch across the ridgeline like the spine of some ancient creature, and everything about the site feels older than the stories told about it, older than kingdoms, older even than the earliest written histories of the region. Gathasphaya stands on a high plateau overlooking deep valleys. From this vantage point, the entire horizon opens in front of you, hills, sands, distant mountains fading into haze. Whoever chose this location knew exactly what they were doing. The fort sits where visibility is absolute. From its towers, one could see movement from miles away, long before danger arrived at the gate. But this was no simple lookout post. The architecture, the scale, and the engineering all suggest something far more purposeful. The walls are made of massive cyclopean stones, some weighing several tons. They were shaped minimally, then locked together with an accuracy that feels instinctive rather than mathematical. The joints between them are tight, almost seamless in places. There is no mortar. The weight of the stones alone keeps the structure standing. This technique appears across the ancient world, in Peru, in Anatolia, in Greece. But here in Jordan, it takes on its own character. The builders seem to understand the stone deeply, working with its natural form rather than forcing it into symmetry. Archaeologists date the site to the Bronze Age, possibly around 1600 BCE, though some evidence suggests earlier phases. Pottery fragments found nearby match early settlement layers, hinting that Gathasphaya may have begun as a ceremonial center or refuge before becoming a fortress. But its true origin remains uncertain. The site carries no inscriptions, no royal names, no records, only stone, silent, heavy, enduring. Walking through the ruins, you find long corridors formed by double walls, open courtyards where fires once burned, and the bases of circular towers that once rose far higher. Some sections still stand chest-high, untouched except by time. Others have collapsed into piles of jagged rock. Here and there, carved stones appear, not decorated, but shaped with intention, suggesting specific functions now forgotten. A niche that may have held offerings, a platform that may have been used for signaling, a threshold worn smooth by countless footsteps. The sheer size of the fort raises questions. Why build something so large in a place so remote? Why invest such effort into lifting and placing stones that required entire teams to move? The answer may lie in the landscape itself. This region was once a crossroads, a path between the Levant, Arabia, and the desert kingdoms beyond. Caravans, traders, and travelers would have moved through these highlands, seeking safe routes and water sources. A fortress like Gathasphaya would have offered protection and control over the passage. But there is another layer to its mystery. The remains of megalithic structures scattered around the fort, standing stones, cairns, and stone platforms, suggest that this area held spiritual significance long before the fort was constructed. The builders may have chosen this place not only for strategic advantage, but for its sacred resonance. Across ancient Jordan, megaliths often mark ritual sites, ancestral spaces, or places where communities gathered to celebrate seasonal rites. Gathasphaya may have united both functions, protector and sacred center. Inside the walls, archaeologists found hints of daily life. Grinding stones, hearths, and fragments of pottery tell of people who lived, cooked, and worked within the fort. Evidence of animal remains indicates herding and storage. The community here was not large, but it was stable. Families or groups who maintained the site for years, possibly centuries. Their lives would have been shaped by weather, by trade, by the rhythms of the surrounding land. Nights would have been quiet except for the wind, days measured by movement across the horizon. One of the most intriguing features of Gathasphaya is the massive southern tower, its foundation still intact. Its blocks are some of the largest on site, arranged in a circular layout that suggests defensive capability far stronger than typical Bronze Age outposts. From this tower, anyone approaching the valley floor could be seen long before arrival. The tower's interior remains partially preserved, narrow steps leading upward, storage niches cut into the stone, and an elevated platform that may have served as a lookout or signaling area. The fort's isolation today makes it difficult to imagine its former purpose, but ancient trade routes once threaded this area: copper from the Araba, incense from Arabia, pottery from the Levant. All passed through these landscapes. The people of Gathasphaya may have served as guardians of that passage, ensuring safety or imposing authority. Or they may have been part of a larger network of fortified sites that marked tribal territories. As with many megalithic places, multiple explanations overlap, and the truth likely lies somewhere between. Time has softened the fort's edges. Grass grows between the stones. The wind whistles through its empty corridors. But the presence of the place remains powerful. The stones feel anchored, purposeful. Even in ruin, there is clarity, a sense that Gathasphaya was built to last, to watch, to endure. It has outlived the people who made it, outlived their languages, their stories, even their memory. Yet the structure still stands, refusing to disappear. For archaeologists, Gathasphia represents a chapter of Jordan's Bronze Age that is still being written. New surveys reveal more walls beneath the soil, more structures hidden beneath vegetation. Each discovery expands the picture, hinting at a culture that mastered stone architecture long before history recorded it. The fort's cyclopean blocks tell us that the builders were skilled, organized, and determined, capable of shaping their environment with precision. What lingers most when standing among the stones is the silence, not emptiness, but a steady, ancient quiet, the kind that carries memory without words. The fort feels like a threshold between the known and the forgotten, a reminder that the people who came before us understood their world in ways we may never fully grasp. They built from stone not just for defense, but for meaning, a meaning that survives even after language fades. The megalithic fort of Gathasphia remains one of Jordan's least understood sites, yet one of its most powerful. It stands as a monument to early human ambition, a place where stone became not just shelter or barrier, but identity. It reminds us that long before empires rose and fell, there were builders who shaped the earth with patience and intention, leaving behind structures that whisper across time. The megalithic Sphinx of Jebel el Banat, Algeria. In the highlands of northeastern Algeria, where winds sweep across empty plateaus and the earth breaks into ridges of pale limestone, there is a place few have heard of, and even fewer have seen. The landscape is dry, silent, and ancient, a horizon of rock shaped by time. Yet hidden among these ridges, half fused with the mountain itself, stands a colossal carving that feels older than memory. Locals call it the Sphinx of Jebel el Banat, a name whispered more in curiosity than certainty. It is a monument so isolated, so weathered, that it seems to hover between the natural and the man-made. Jebel el Banat rises between the regions of Constantine and Batna, a rugged outcrop in the Ares Mountains. Here, long before cities and borders, early North African cultures carved their beliefs into stone. The land is scattered with megaliths, tombs, and rock art, fragments of forgotten civilizations, but the Sphinx is unlike any of them. It sits on a slope overlooking a barren valley, carved directly into a massive block of limestone. Its outline is unmistakable, the proud chest, the straight back, the crouched posture of a guardian. Yet its face is worn, its features faint, as if the desert has spent millennia trying to erase it. The carving is enormous. From base to head, it measures several meters, and much of its lower body remains buried beneath layers of sediment and wind-blown sand. Standing before it, one senses the weight of its presence, not aggressive or monumental in the way of Egyptian sphinxes, but quiet and watchful, like a creature frozen at the threshold of its own forgotten world. The rock around it carries natural fissures, but the lines that form the Sphinx are deliberate, chiseled and shaped, unmistakably the work of human hands. Who carved it and when, are questions without answers. Algeria is rich with prehistoric and protohistoric monuments, from Neolithic tombs to Iron Age sanctuaries. The people who once lived in the Ares, ancestors of the early Berber tribes, created stone structures so old that they blur into myth. Some scholars suggest the Sphinx of Jebel el Banat could date back 4,000 to 6,000 years, perhaps even older. Its style does not match Egypt, nor Rome, nor Carthage. It stands outside those traditions, belonging instead to a local and deeply ancient sculptural world. The figure's head, once more defined, has softened with centuries of weather. Still fragments of form remain, the suggestion of a snout or face, a brow, an ear-like contour. The body is more intact, a long torso carved with a straight back, powerful shoulders, and the crouched legs of a guardian beast. Some believe the carvers intended a lion, others say it resembles a hybrid creature, part human, part animal, part spirit. The ambiguity only deepens its aura. Around the Sphinx, archaeologists have documented traces of megalithic structures, circular stone settings, cairns, and alignments that indicate ritual activity. These may have been memorial places, ceremonial grounds, or markers of sacred terrain. In many ancient cultures of North Africa, mountains were seen as dwelling places of spirits, ancestors, and protective beings. Carvings were not mere decoration. They were manifestations of presence, guardians, intermediaries, or silent watchers. The Sphinx may have served such a role, positioned to face the valley as if to watch over it. The area surrounding Jebel el Banat is dotted with legends. Some villagers speak of the daughters of the mountain, spirits said to inhabit the peaks. Others say the monument was carved by ancient giants or by a vanished people whose names are no longer known. While these stories cannot be taken as history, they preserve a sense of awe, a recognition that the Sphinx is not simply a rock, but a place where something once mattered deeply. Its placement is striking. The figure is carved at the base of a cliff, the stone above forming a natural crown over its head. The mountain behind it rises sharply, giving the impression that the Sphinx is emerging from the earth itself. When sunlight falls across the valley in the early morning, the carving casts a long shadow, stretching toward the open plains. In that moment, its form becomes clearer, the lines sharper, the body more defined. Shadow reveals what time has tried to hide. The creation of such a sculpture would have required immense effort. The limestone of Jebel el Banat is dense and hard. Without metal tools, ancient sculptors would have hammered it with stone picks, slowly shaping its form. The process would have taken months, perhaps years. Yet the carvers persisted, driven by belief, or duty, or the human need to leave a mark upon the world. In those hammer strokes lies the echo of an ancient mind, the desire to translate myth into matter. One theory suggests the Sphinx may have been part of a funerary complex, marking the tomb of a leader or sacred figure. Megalithic tombs in the region often include symbolic guardians. Another theory proposes it was tied to seasonal rituals, a marker aligned with the rising or setting sun at certain times of the year. The Aurora Mountains have long been home to pastoral communities, whose lives followed the cycles of the seasons. A carved guardian may have served as a focal point for offerings or ceremonies meant to protect the land and its people, but perhaps the greatest enigma is the statue's style. It does not resemble Egyptian sphinxes, which are elongated and explicitly human-headed, nor does it match Near Eastern lamassu or Mediterranean lions. Its shape is bulkier, more abstract, suggesting an indigenous sculptural language, independent of neighboring civilizations. This artistic isolation hints at a cultural world that has largely vanished, leaving only this single colossal figure to speak for it. The stone itself carries the memory of centuries. Its surface is cracked and pitted, smoothed in some places by wind, eroded in others by rain. Moss grows in sheltered crevices. Small plants cling to the edges where soil has gathered. Time has not erased the Sphinx, it has woven it into the mountain. One can no longer tell where human carving ends and natural erosion begins. The two have fused, creating something that feels both intentional and organic. Standing before the Sphinx of Jebel el-Binat, the silence is profound. The valley spreads out below like a forgotten story. The wind carries nothing but the sound of itself. In that stillness, the monument feels alive, not in a supernatural sense, but in the way ancient things become more than what they are. They gather meaning, they become symbols. They remind us that humans have always sought connection with the land, with the unknown, with forces larger than themselves. The megalithic Sphinx of Jebel el-Binat remains largely unstudied, uncelebrated, and unvisited, a guardian without worshippers, a monument without inscription. Yet its existence is a quiet triumph of ancient imagination. It stands as testimony to a civilization that understood stone as not merely material, but memory, a way of speaking across millennia. And so it watches still, carved into the bones of the mountain, looking out over a silent valley. Its story may be forgotten, but its presence endures, a guardian of time, waiting for eyes willing to see the world as its creators once did, full of spirits, full of meaning, full of stone shaped into life. The flooded temple of Hubaba. In the northern reaches of Iraq, where the Tigris once moved freely across wide plains, an older world lies hidden beneath the water. When rising reservoirs swallowed the surrounding valleys, they covered not only fields and villages, but an ancient sanctuary, a place carved from stone, long before empires rose and fell. It is known today as the Temple of Hubaba, a site that sank beneath the river when the modern dam closed its gates. All that remains are brief glimpses captured before the valley flooded. Colossal statues, weathered walls, and a temple facade that had stood for thousands of years. Archaeologists arrived here knowing the water would come. They had only a short season to uncover whatever history lay in the rocks. What they found was a sanctuary carved from limestone cliffs, a temple built directly into the mountainside, its reliefs facing the river as if watching those who passed along the banks. The statues were enormous, humanoid figures with broad shoulders, heavy limbs, and features carved in bold lines. Their expressions were solemn, their hands placed in ritual poses. They stood like guardians, silent but imposing, their forms partly fused with the rock that gave them shape. The identity of Hubaba, the being to whom the temple was dedicated, remains uncertain. Some scholars see echoes of Mesopotamian river deities, protectors of water and fertility. Others see links to local gods known only from scattered inscriptions. But the architecture itself suggests a time older than recorded history, a temple whose origins disappear into the Bronze Age, perhaps even earlier. Its builders carved directly into the cliff, shaping the stone into pillars, steps, and alcoves. Nothing was imported. The mountain itself became the temple. As archaeologists explored the chambers, they found evidence of repeated use over centuries. Fire pits, votive vessels, and stone basins used for offerings. The temple had likely served travelers and fishermen, people who relied on the river for life and movement. Its position, overlooking the Tigris, suggests that it was both shrine and signal. a landmark for those navigating the river long before written maps existed. The statues, standing with their feet submerged in silt, may once have been brightly painted, their colors reflecting in the water. One statue stood out among them, a giant figure whose hands clasped a vessel at its chest, as if offering water back to the river. Its face was broad and calm, its hair carved in long strands, its eyes deep set. The figure seemed to merge with the cliff behind it, half emerging, half embedded, a living part of the landscape. The vessel it held bore faint signs of incisions, circles, wave lines, and symbols that likely related to the river's seasonal cycles. The meaning of these marks is lost, but their placement hints at rituals tied to floodwaters and renewal. Further along the cliff, archaeologists uncovered another statue lying broken on the ground, a massive head with powerful features, its surface eroded by centuries of wind. The carving style suggested a cultural blend, traits seen in Mesopotamian art, but also elements found in the highlands to the north. This mixing of traditions indicates that the temple sat at a crossroads, where mountain tribes, river communities, and early urban cultures met. The sanctuary may have been a gathering place, a shared sacred space linking different worlds. Hidden behind the main facade was a narrow corridor that descended into the rock. Its walls bore faint traces of red pigment, perhaps from ancient ceremonies. The corridor led to a chamber with a raised platform and what appeared to be a cistern carved from the stone floor. Some believe this chamber was the heart of the temple, a place where water was collected, blessed, or symbolically offered to the gods. In a region where drought and flood shaped every life, a temple dedicated to water would have held deep significance. It may even have served as a ritual center for predicting seasonal changes, reading omens, or performing rites of protection against the unpredictable river. Before the floodwaters arrived, archaeologists documented everything they could. The valley echoed with the sound of generators, tools, and rushing water as the final days approached. Each statue was measured, photographed, and mapped, though only a few could be moved. Most were too massive, too fragile, or too deeply rooted in the cliff. When the waters rose, they rose quickly, swallowing the lowest chambers first, then the steps, then the colossal statues. One by one, the stone guardians disappeared beneath the surface, their outlines fading into the greenish depths. Today, the Temple of Humbaba lies underwater, preserved in silence. Divers cannot reach it easily, and shifting currents cover its location in darkness. But the memory of its discovery remains vivid, the carved faces watching over the river, the marks of ancient tools on the stone, the offerings left in small basins near the cliff. The site, though submerged, still exists as a hidden chapter of Mesopotamia's earliest spiritual history. The floodwaters created a kind of accidental time capsule. In the darkness below, the statues remain untouched by weather and wind. Their features, though unseen, are preserved in perfect stillness. The temple now rests in a world without sunlight, where silt moves slowly, and fish drift through the shadows of columns carved thousands of years ago. It is a rare kind of preservation, a sanctuary sealed by nature rather than ruin. What the Temple of Humbaba represents is more than archaeology. It speaks to a time when rivers were sacred, when cliffs were carved into living shrines, and when the earth itself was understood as a presence to be honored. The people who built this temple did not leave written explanations. Their beliefs were shaped in stone, not in tablets. Their rituals were carried out in echoing chambers, not recorded in texts. Yet through their carvings, we glimpse a world where nature, spirit, and human life were intimately connected. In the quiet depths of the reservoir, the temple still stands, a submerged echo of devotion carved thousands of years ago. The river that once fed its rituals now guards its memory, and though the water hides it from sight, the flooded Temple of Humbaba remains one of the most haunting reminders of how ancient people sought connection with the forces that shaped their lives, carving awe into stone before allowing time to take it back. The temple city of Takhti Soliman. In the highlands of northwestern Iran, surrounded by silent mountains and rolling volcanic earth, lies a place that feels suspended between worlds. A circular lake glows in the center, fed by deep springs hidden beneath the earth. Around it rise the remains of temples, palaces, and fire shrines, their stones warmed by the same sun that once shone on kings, priests, and pilgrims. This is Takhti Soliman, an ancient sanctuary built around a lake believed to be both sacred and eternal, a place where earth, fire, and water met in the heart of Persia's spiritual landscape. The lake itself is the mystery that shaped everything. Perfectly round and impossibly deep, it rises from a fissure in the earth's crust, emerging at a constant temperature regardless of season. Its waters appear calm on the surface, yet they conceal layers of mineral deposits that have grown like underwater walls for thousands of years. For ancient Persians, this lake was not just water, it was creation, a source older than kingdoms, older than cities, older than any temple that stood beside it. Around this natural wonder, the Zoroastrians built one of their most important fire temple complexes. Long before the Achaemenid Empire, long before kings carved their names into mountains, priests tended a sacred flame here, a fire believed to represent truth, purity, and cosmic order. To protect the flame and honor the lake, they built enclosures, halls, altars, and walkways in careful harmony with the landscape. Nothing about Takht Suleiman feels accidental. It feels as though each structure was placed to echo the rhythm of something older than architecture itself. As centuries passed, the site grew in complexity. By the Sasanian period, Takht Suleiman had become a royal sanctuary, a place where rulers came not only to pray, but to legitimize their power. Archaeological ruins still show the outlines of palatial walls, thick defensive towers, and ceremonial gateways. Yet despite its grandeur, the architecture feels deeply restrained, guided by principles rather than ambition. The builders of this sanctuary were not trying to impress, they were trying to align themselves with something sacred. Walking through the site, one encounters long rectangular halls where priests once moved in silence, preparing offerings. Stone platforms rise near the lake's edge, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Beneath them, channels carved into bedrock carried water from the lake to purification basins, part of rituals meant to balance water and fire, purity and endurance. The flames of the temple were never allowed to touch the lake directly, yet the two forces lived side by side in a perpetual balance. Inscriptions are sparse, and the silence of the site only deepens its power. Much of what is known comes from later texts describing the importance of fire and water in Persian belief. Fire represented wisdom, clarity, and justice. Water represented creation, life, and renewal. In Takht Suleiman, these forces were not opposed but intertwined. The temple complex seems to have been designed around this philosophy. Every hallway, altar, and courtyard placed to mediate the relationship between the sacred spring and the eternal flame. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of thick mineral formations beneath the lake, layers building upon layers, forming terraces and chimneys over thousands of years. This slow geological growth likely contributed to the sanctuary's aura. People who lived here would have seen the lake constantly shaping its own stone, quietly, patiently, without human intervention. To them, such a phenomenon must have seemed like a living miracle, a sign that the earth itself was alive. The site also bears traces of ancient myths. Later legends associated Takht Suleiman with the throne of King Solomon, the prophet king revered across cultures. Though these stories belong to much later centuries, they show how strongly the place impressed the human imagination. Even when its original purpose was forgotten, its presence drew new layers of meaning. The ruins became more than remains. They became symbols. During the Mongol Ilkhanate period, the sanctuary experienced a brief resurgence. Rulers built new structures, refurbishing parts of the complex and transforming some halls into ceremonial chambers. Yet they too eventually abandoned it. Earthquakes, fires, and political shifts left the site empty. The lake remained, the mountains remained, but the voices faded, leaving only stone and water. What makes Takht Suleiman enduring is not grandeur but atmosphere. The complex sits on a plateau surrounded by volcanic craters, including Mount Zendane Suleiman, an extinct cone that rises like a sentinel above the valley. The landscape is stark yet meditative, a place where silence feels ancient. The ruins do not dominate the land, they seem to merge with it, worn by wind, heat, and slow time. Fragments of stucco decorations have been found in the ruins, showing delicate patterns and symbols once painted in vivid colors. These traces show that the sanctuary was not always a monochrome ruin. It once breathed with artistry. Pilgrims would have walked through bright halls, past reliefs depicting winged creatures and floral motifs, under ceilings supported by carved columns. Even in decay, the remnants reveal refinement. Yet the most powerful element of Takht Suleiman remains the lake. Its water is opaque, colored by minerals, and its surface rarely stirs. It does not freeze in winter, nor does it evaporate in summer. Archaeologists measuring its depth found that the floor drops sharply into darkness, reaching down through limestone pipes formed by mineral deposits. It is a reservoir that seems bottomless, a mirror reflecting sky and ruin, a reminder that some truths remain unreachable. Standing beside the lake, one senses the same awe that must have touched the ancient priests. The water glows softly under the sun, while wind ripples through the surrounding grass. The ruins lean inward, as if listening. In moments like this, the boundaries between past and present dissolve. The fire is gone, the chants are gone, the kings are dust, yet the setting still holds the same quiet gravity. The site was chosen because it felt sacred, and that feeling has survived the loss of temples and the fall of empires. Takht Suleiman is a place that embodies the earliest human attempts to understand the universe through ritual and structure. It is a sanctuary built not for spectacle but for alignment with nature, with spirit, with the unseen laws believed to govern both. Every stone placed here carries that intention. Every platform and courtyard reflects a philosophy that saw humans as participants in a cosmic order, not rulers over it. The ruins invite contemplation rather than explanation. They remind us that ancient architecture was not always about dominance, but about harmony, about creating a space where the world felt whole, where elements could coexist without conflict. In the meeting of fire and water, earth and sky, Takta Soleiman remains a testament to that vision, and when the sun lowers behind the hills, and the lake begins to darken, the sanctuary feels timeless again, the same shadows falling on the same stones that once guided priests through their rituals. Nothing moves, yet everything resonates. The silence is its own message. The place still listens. The place still remembers. The colossal guardian of Tepe Sialk. In the desert basin of central Iran, where wind moves across pale earth and dust gathers like ancient breath, lies a mound that holds some of the oldest human history in the region, Tepe Sialk. It is a place where time folds in on itself. Layer upon layer of settlement rises from the soil, each older than the last, stretching back more than 7,000 years. Pottery, foundations, tools, and bones trace the evolution of a community that existed long before Persia, long before empire, long before recorded memory found words to describe itself. But among these relics, one discovery stands apart, a figure so imposing and enigmatic that it reshaped how archaeologists understood the spiritual world of ancient Iran. From the broken earth, they uncovered the pieces of a colossal clay guardian, a massive statue, shattered but unmistakably powerful, created by a people whose beliefs have vanished into silence. The guardian was not carved from stone, nor cast in metal, but molded from clay, shaped by hands that understood both fragility and permanence. Its remains revealed a being of extraordinary size, far larger than life, with sturdy limbs and a posture that conveyed authority. The fragments were scattered throughout a ceremonial area of the mound, as though toppled during some violent event, an earthquake, an invasion, or the slow collapse of a forgotten ritual hall. Archaeologists pieced together what they could. The sculpture had once stood several meters tall, anchored to a platform in the central complex of Sialk's northern mound. Its body was thick and monumental, its shoulders rose broad and commanding, and its face, reconstructed from surviving fragments, carried a stylized expression seen in the oldest art of the Iranian plateau: almond-shaped eyes, a straight, solemn mouth, and the faint outline of hair, or a headdress. This guardian was no ordinary figure. The craftsmanship showed planning, reverence, and communal effort. Molding clay at such scale required not just artistic ability, but technical knowledge, reinforcing the core, drying the pieces carefully, assembling them in place. For the people who built it, this was a work of devotion, meant to stand before their community as both protector and presence. Tepe Sialk is older than many ancient civilizations. Its earliest layers date back to the Neolithic period, when farming communities first settled near seasonal rivers that flowed into the central deserts. By the 3rd millennium BCE, Sialk had become a thriving ritual and trade center, connected to the broader cultural zones of Mesopotamia, Elam, and the Iranian plateau. Its people built temples, produced beautiful ceramics, and developed metallurgical skills that influenced later cultures. The discovery of the guardian revealed that spiritual life at Sialk was complex and symbolic. The statue likely stood at the entrance of a sacred precinct, a threshold between ordinary life and ceremonial space. Guardians in ancient Near Eastern cultures protected sanctuaries, overseeing rites and marking boundaries between the human and the divine. The Sialk guardian served this role long before similar monumental figures appeared in the grand temples of Mesopotamia or the fortified gateways of later Persian cities. Its clay form, though vulnerable, was crafted to endure. The artisans may have reinforced the interior with reeds or straw, shaping it layer by layer. The outer surface would have been smoothed and polished, perhaps even painted with pigments now lost to time. Traces of red ochre and white plaster found near the fragments suggest that the guardian may once have gleamed with color beneath the desert sun, a figure both earthly and radiant. What the guardian represented is still uncertain. No inscriptions survive from Sialk's earliest phases, and its belief system remains largely unrecorded. The statue's massive size suggests it depicted not a person, but a deity, ancestor, or supernatural protector. Its body, powerful and grounded, evokes strength. Its expression, calm and unblinking, suggests vigilance. Some researchers believe it may have represented a protective spirit tied to fertility or the cycle of life and death, a being watching over both community and harvest. Others think it may have belonged to a pair of guardians, positioned symmetrically around a temple entrance. The fragments found in nearby pits hint at ritual destruction, a ceremonial act marking the end of an era or the abandonment of a sacred space. The city around the guardian tells its own story. Tepe Sialk's people built with adobe and mud brick, shaping multi-room houses, workshops, and ceremonial platforms. They created fine pottery, decorated with geometric designs, spirals, animals, birds, motifs that echo throughout later Persian art. They traded obsidian, copper, lapis lazuli, and shells across vast distances. Their burial grounds reveal complex funerary rites, signs of a culture deeply tied to ancestry and memory. When the Guardian still stood, Sialk would have been alive with sound. Children running across courtyards, potters shaping vessels on slow-turning wheels, fire glowing from furnaces used to smelt metal and fire clay, priests or elders conducting rituals near the statue, offering grains, oils, or small figurines. The Guardian watched over all of it, its gaze fixed outward, its presence steady. But over time, environmental changes altered the region. Rivers shifted, floods swept through, and droughts followed. The city declined, structures collapsed. The Guardian broke and fell into the earth. It waited there, buried in silence, for thousands of years, a collapsed monument of a forgotten faith. When archaeologists finally uncovered the fragments in the 20th century, the desert wind moved across them as though greeting an old memory. Each piece, a section of limb, a curve of torso, a part of the face, offered a glimpse into a past that had no written voice. The reconstruction was partial, but enough to feel its scale, enough to understand that this was no ordinary statue. It was a cornerstone of early Iranian ritual life, a guardian whose form captured the imagination long after its world had vanished. Even broken, it held authority. Even silent, it told a story. The colossal guardian of Tepe Sialk is one of the earliest known monumental sculptures of the Iranian plateau, a reminder that long before the rise of Persia, long before kings carved their names into cliffs or built fluted columns that touched the sky, there were communities who shaped their beliefs in clay and set them at the heart of their lives. What remains of the Guardian is not just the fragments of a statue, but the echo of an ancient worldview, one in which Earth itself could be molded into protection, where form carried spirit, and where even a figure made from simple clay could stand watch over a civilization. And though the city is ruins, and the Guardian is broken, its story endures, rising again from the sand with the same steady presence it once held. A reminder that even in the earliest chapters of human history, people were already building monuments not just of strength but of meaning. The Moon Temple of El Infirn, Anoth Porter Verde. In the high plains of central Colombia, where morning mist moves across open valleys and the mountains form a quiet ring around the horizon, stands one of the most enigmatic megalithic sites in South America. Locals call it El Infiernito, the Little Hell, a name given long after its builders disappeared. But to those who shaped it, placed its stones, and aligned its pillars with the heavens, it was nothing like hell at all. It was a place of ritual, of skywatching, of connection between the earth and the moon. This was a lunar observatory, a sanctuary, where ancient astronomer priests measured time not by clocks or calendars, but by the slow rising of the moon over distant hills. The site lies near Villa de Leyva, in the territory once ruled by the Muisca, one of the great civilizations of the Andes. Before the Inca rose in Peru, before Europeans stepped into these valleys, the Muisca had already built a sophisticated world of agriculture, metallurgy, and cosmology. They watched the sky with care, traced cycles, and encoded meaning in every month, season, and solstice. Among their sacred places, El Infiernito was one of the oldest, a temple of standing stones arranged with careful intention, not for war or burial, but for understanding the heavens. Across the plain stand dozens of stone columns, each carved from pale volcanic rock and planted deep into the earth. Their surfaces are weathered, some broken, some leaning slightly, but the overall layout remains clear. A field of pillars arranged in lines and clusters, forming patterns that match celestial points. The purpose of these stones was not decorative, they were markers, placed to observe the rising of the sun and moon at key times of the year. Among these alignments, one stands out, a row of standing stones positioned so that during specific months, the full moon rises directly over a distant hill, lighting the pillars in a straight beam of pale silver. For the Muisca, the moon was more than a celestial object, it was Chia, a goddess of fertility, water, and the cycles of life. When the moon rose along that alignment, it signaled ceremonies tied to planting, harvest, renewal, and the balance between light and darkness. The Muisca worldview was deeply dualistic. Everything existed in pairs, sun and moon, male and female, earth and sky. At El Infiernito, this balance was made visible. Some pillars marked the solstice sunrise, others aligned with lunar standstills, rare points in the moon's long cycle when it rises at its most extreme angles. To track such movements required generations of observation, patience, and memory. The people who built El Infiernito were not guessing, they were scientists of their time, watching the heavens with precision. Archaeological excavations around the stones revealed traces of ritual activity, ceramic fragments, offerings, and carefully buried objects. The stones were not isolated, they formed part of a wider ceremonial landscape. Nearby stand burial mounds, circular earthworks, and water channels, all part of a system that linked cosmology with everyday life. The Muisca did not separate the sacred from the practical. The sky guided agriculture. Agriculture sustained community. Community honored the gods through ritual. The pillars themselves vary in size. Some rise nearly 2 meters high. Others are smaller, set in pairs or groups. Their shapes are simple, cylindrical, smooth, undecorated. Their power lies not in ornament, but in placement. To stand among them is to feel the geometry of sky and earth unfolding across the valley. The quiet is deep. The wind moves through the stones with a low whisper. Shadows mark the ground in clean lines when the sun is low. And when the moon rises, the pillars glow faintly, pale edges catching the distant light. The ancestors who built this place likely traveled long distances to gather here. Ceremonies tied to the moon were central to Muisca identity. Myths tell of Chia and Sueiki, the moon and the sun, whose relationship shaped the world. Their cycles created the tides of life. Their interactions governed the rhythm of seasons, rains, and harvests. At El Infiernito, those myths took physical form. Each pillar was a reminder that the universe was ordered, understandable, and alive. Further studies of the site revealed alignments not only with the moon, but also with the equinox sunrise. At 2 points each year, when day and night stand equal, the sun rose directly between specific pillars, illuminating a central ceremonial area. This dual solar-lunar design reinforces the idea that El Infiernito was a place where balance mattered, where people sought to anchor themselves within the rhythm of the sky. The broader region adds another layer of mystery. The valley is dotted with natural formations, springs, fertile soil, and stones shaped by water and time. For a farming society dependent on seasonal rains, reading the signs of nature was essential. The moon played a crucial role in this cycle. Its phases guided planting. Its light marked time. To miss its signals meant risking hunger. So the Muisca built a place where the moon's path could be traced, not by chance, but by stone. As centuries passed, the site evolved. New pillars were added. Others were removed or rearranged. The rituals changed as leaders changed. What remained constant was the belief that the cosmos was a partner to humanity, that life and celestial movement were part of the same language. El Infiernito became a center of interpretation. Priests, known for their knowledge of the sky, stood among the stones to read the future and guide their people. When foreign powers entered the region and imposed new systems, the old rituals faded. The stones, weathered by time, sank deeper into the soil. Yet the alignments remained, even after the ceremony stopped. The temple kept its silence. The moon still rises over the distant hills exactly as it once did. The light still falls across the stones in the same ancient pattern. The site holds its purpose without needing practitioners. To walk among the pillars now is to feel that continuity, the long presence of skywatchers who lived by the moon's rhythm. The stones do not speak, but they suggest a worldview where humanity did not dominate nature but moved with it. The Muisca built not for spectacle but for understanding. Their temple was not a palace or fortress, it was a tool for seeing, a way of listening to the universe. The moon temple of El Infiernito remains one of the oldest and most elegant examples of ancient astronomy in the Americas. It stands as a reminder that long before modern science, people watched the heavens with patience, intelligence, and reverence. The pillars rise from the earth like markers of time itself, witnesses to thousands of moonrises, thousands of cycles, thousands of stories woven through the night sky. Its silence is not emptiness. It is memory. The memory of a people who believed that the moon carried wisdom, that the stones could hold it, and that the valley, open to the sky, was a place where earth and cosmos met in quiet harmony. The giant terracotta drums of Viet Carré. In the humid river plains of northern Vietnam, where mist hangs low and the land shifts between forest and water, archaeologists uncovered a set of objects so strange and so monumental that they reshaped what we understand about the ancient Dong Sun civilization. Buried inside a wooden coffin at Viet Carré, wrapped in layers of time, lay enormous bronze drums, massive vessels of sound and ceremony that bridged the world of the living and the world of the ancestors. They were not small instruments, they were giant, the size of cauldrons, heavy enough to anchor a ritual ground, cast in bronze at a scale that still challenges explanation. The Viet Carré drums, dating back more than 2,000 years, belong to a tradition that spread across Southeast Asia, a culture known for its mastery of metallurgy, long before iron became common in many parts of the world. The Dong Son people lived along rivers, cultivating rice and fishing from long wooden boats carved with elegant prows. Yet beneath this humble rhythm of life, they possessed a technical brilliance that allowed them to cast bronze in forms unmatched for centuries. The drums were discovered inside a rectangular burial, laid carefully with spears, tools, ornaments, and fragments of wood from a boat-shaped coffin. Their presence suggested not just status, but identity. The person buried there may have been a leader, a spiritual figure, or a guardian of ritual tradition. The drums were not placed as objects, they were placed as companions, symbols of power that resonated beyond sound. A dongsan drum is not simply a musical instrument, its shape, a wide body, flaring rim, and broad surface, is architectural. The top is often decorated with radiating star patterns, birds in flight, boats filled with rowers, and scenes of ritual. These designs were not decoration, they were cosmology. The center star symbolized the sky, the ancestors, or the axis of the world. Around it the images spiraled outward, the movement of life, ceremony, and cycle. When struck, the drum did more than produce sound, it carried meaning across space, vibrating with intention. The Viet K drums stand apart because of their size. They are larger than typical dongsan drums, heavy enough that moving them must have required groups of people. Casting drums of this scale meant preparing clay molds taller than a person, heating furnaces capable of melting massive quantities of copper and tin, and coordinating teams of metallurgists with intimate knowledge of temperature, flow, and timing. Each drum was made in a single pour, a technique requiring precision so advanced that archaeologists still debate how it was achieved. When these drums were struck, the sound would have carried across the valley, a deep, resonant tone that lingered in the air. Such sound was not just heard, it was felt. It could mark the passing of seasons, the calling of spirits, the gathering of clans, or the beginning of war. In the humid atmosphere of the Red River Delta, the drum's echo would have rolled across water and rice fields like thunder. Around the drums, the burial contained tools made with exquisite craftsmanship, bronze spearheads with swirling patterns, bells shaped like birds, and ritual knives carved with delicate designs. These objects, arranged carefully beside the body, suggest a ritual understanding of death, that the journey to the ancestors required music, protection, and offerings. The giant drums were not meant to be played again, their final service was silence, marking a transition into another realm. The Dongsun culture flourished between rivers, where floods nourished crops, and travel was measured not by roads but by waterways. Boats appear constantly in their art, long canoes filled with rowers, dancers, drummers, warriors, and shamans. Many archaeologists believe the drums themselves were used during ceremonies that took place on boats. A drum, placed in the center of a canoe, may have been played to call upon ancestral spirits, echoing over water. The Viet K burial, with its boat-shaped coffin and giant drums, reinforces this idea. Life and death alike flowed with the river. The symbolism of the drum also connected the Dongsun people to the natural world. Bronze, created from fire and earth, was believed to hold power. The drum's sound mimicked thunder, a voice of the sky. The starburst pattern at its center may have represented the sun, the source of life. Birds, often carved into the surface, symbolized movement between worlds. Creatures that lived in both sky and earth, carrying messages across realms. To strike the drum was to summon these forces, to weave sound into ritual. What makes the Viet K drums extraordinary is their context. They were not placed in a temple or a ceremonial platform, but buried intimately with a single person. This suggests that the buried figure held more than authority, they held meaning. They may have been a ritual leader, someone responsible for calling rains, blessing harvests, or guiding the dead. The drums were not only markers of status, they were extensions of identity, tools of cosmic importance. The craftsmanship of the bronze is subtle and refined. The surfaces bear fine lines, geometric borders, and scenes of daily and ritual life. No two Dongsan drums are identical. Each carries unique motifs, stories engraved in metal. The Viet K drums show patterns arranged with rhythm and symmetry, balanced like the music they once produced. The artisans who created them were metallurgists and artists at once, combining technology with belief. Over time, the drum tradition spread across Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Indonesia carried along trade routes and cultural exchanges. But the earliest and most sophisticated examples belong to the Dongsan heartland in northern Vietnam. The Viet K drums represent this tradition at its height, when bronze was shaped with an understanding that went beyond technique. It was spiritual, intuitive, and communal. To view the drums is to see more than metal. Their sheer size invites questions. Who moved them? Who played them? Who listened? Their surface, green with age, carries faint traces of ancient hands. The star at the center still catches light. The birds, though worn, still seem poised for flight. The silence around them feels deliberate, as if the sound they once made still lingers somewhere in the metal. The giant terracotta bronze drums of Viet K stand as the voice of a civilization that spoke through rhythm instead of words. Their presence in a burial reveals a culture where music was not entertainment, but a bridge between realms. Their craftsmanship reveals minds capable of engineering as precise as their spiritual understanding. Their survival reveals something deeper, that humans, even in prehistory, sought connection beyond sight and sound. They remain anchored in their silence, yet echoing with the memory of ceremonies that once filled river valleys with sound. The drums are more than artifacts. They are resonances, heavy, quiet, and eternal, holding within them the pulse of a people who understood that even in death, the world must be met with music. The pyramid city of Tula, Tutec. The dry plateau of central Mexico holds the remains of a city that once shaped an entire age, a place where warriors rose in stone, where pyramids watched over plazas, and where an empire carved its ideals into the sky. This was Tula, the city of the Toltecs, a civilization whose influence stretched far beyond its borders, carried through stories, myths, and memory. Today only fragments remain, stone terraces, broken columns, and atop one pyramid, 4 towering figures known as the Atlanteans of Tula. These silent guardians stand as the last echo of a people whose world has largely vanished. Tula flourished around 1000 CE, long before the height of the Aztecs. For centuries, it was the political and spiritual center of the Toltec world, a place where rulers, warriors, and artisans lived within walls of stone and adobe. Yet unlike later cities like Tenochtitlan or Teotihuacan, Tula was not a metropolis defined by scale. Its significance lies instead in its symbolism. The Toltecs were remembered as master builders and thinkers, carriers of knowledge that shaped Mesoamerica. When the Aztecs rose to power centuries later, they looked to Tula as the model of what a great city should be. At the heart of Tula stands Pyramid B, a stepped temple that once supported a sanctuary dedicated to the feathered serpent god. The structure is weathered, its edges softened by time, but its presence is unmistakable. On its summit stand the Atlanteans, 4 monumental stone warriors carved from basalt. Each figure rises nearly 5 meters, tall enough to dwarf a human visitor, yet carved with precision that reveals a deep artistic tradition. Their bodies are upright and rigid, their faces expressionless, their helmets decorated with feathered headdresses. Across their chests lie butterfly pectorals, symbols of transformation and fire. In their hands they hold spear throwers, atlatls, tools that gave warriors deadly reach. Their belts carry small circular shields and pouches, their legs wrapped in protective armor. The carvings are smooth yet detailed, stylized but unmistakably human. They do not look like kings, they look like sentinels. Archaeologists believe these figures once supported the roof of the temple, holding its weight like pillars. But standing free on the pyramid's summit, they appear more like guardians, staring out across the valley, watching, remembering, preserving. The view from where they stand is wide and dry, a landscape of plains and distant hills. In ancient times, this vista carried power. To climb the pyramid was to rise above the city, to see what the rulers saw, to feel the stillness that came with height. Around the pyramid lie remnants of a city built with order and intention. There are columned halls, wide plazas, and low structures arranged with ceremonial symmetry. Stone reliefs show jaguars, eagles, serpents, and warriors, images charged with ritual meaning. In some carvings, rows of warriors march in profile, each carrying atlatls and shields, echoing the posture of the Atlantean statues above. These repeated motifs suggest a society shaped by hierarchy and military power, where warriors were both protectors and symbols of divine order. The Toltecs left no written history that survives today. What is known comes from the ground itself, from pottery shards, carved stone, and architectural patterns. They were skilled artisans, shaping obsidian, shell, and metal with care. They worked with turquoise, creating mosaics that shimmered in light. They built with precision, fitting stone blocks so tightly that the joints remained straight even after centuries of erosion. Their influence spread through trade and tradition, carried by merchants and artisans who traveled widely. But Toltec was more than a center of craft, it was also a center of belief. The main structures of the city align with celestial directions, mirroring the path of the sun. The temples and plazas formed a ritual landscape, where movement itself held meaning. Ceremonies would have taken place under open skies, with incense rising from altars and drums echoing across stone floors. The Atlanteans, standing above it all, were part of this sacred design, symbols of warrior priests who connected heaven and earth. Among the ruins, archaeologists found evidence of fire, collapse, and abandonment. Tula's decline remains a subject of study. Environmental changes may have strained its resources. Conflict with neighboring regions may have weakened its hold. Internal shifts in leadership or belief could have reshaped its identity. What is clear is that by the 12th century, Tula was no longer the vibrant city it once was. Its temples fell silent, its plazas emptied, its artisans moved elsewhere. The city became memory. Yet the memory was powerful enough to shape the civilizations that followed. The Aztecs, when rising to power centuries later, believed they were inheritors of the Toltec legacy. They spoke of Tolon, the city of the wise, and imagined its rulers as models of perfection. Whether the legends matched reality did not matter, what mattered was the idea. Through story and sculpture, Tula became the blueprint for greatness. The Atlanteans themselves reflect this dual nature of fact and memory. They are both real, carved, heavy, ancient, and symbolic. Their faces, still and unreadable, carry the impression of timeless guardians. They look beyond their ruined city, as if aware that their purpose has shifted from protecting a temple to preserving a legacy. Their presence is quiet but commanding, echoing the dignity of the artisans who shaped them. The city around them may have faded, but these figures endure as anchors between eras. They remind us that civilizations rise not only through conquest or wealth, but through symbols, forms carved in stone that speak long after voices are gone. The Toltecs shaped such symbols with intention, and the Atlanteans are their most lasting creation. Wind crosses the plateau, brushing the edges of broken columns. Sunlight drifts across the statues, revealing details in their carving. In the silence, the past feels near, not in grandeur but in the quiet persistence of stone. Tula remains a place where myth and archaeology meet, where history is built not on certainty, but on the endurance of form. The pyramid city of Tula may have risen and fallen, but the warriors on its summit still stand, steady, patient, carved from stone that remembers an age when belief, craft, and power were one. The carved animal stele of Navali Kori. In the quiet hills north of the Euphrates, long before writing, before metal, before cities rose from stone, a small community carved pillars that would outlast empires. The site is called Navali Kori, a place overshadowed by nearby Göbekli Tepe, yet just as extraordinary. Here, more than 10,000 years ago, people left behind a group of T-shaped limestone stelae, each carved with the shapes of animals that moved through their world. Foxes, birds, snakes, boars. These carvings were not casual decoration, they were symbols, memories, and beliefs cut directly into stone by hands that had only just stepped out of the Ice Age. The landscape around Navali Chori is gentle now, dry wind brushing across low ridges. But in the early Neolithic it was a river valley fed by seasonal rains. Communities gathered near the water, hunting, gathering, and slowly experimenting with cultivation. In this world of transition, the people of Navali Chori began to treat stone as something more than raw material. They shaped it with purpose, understanding that solid rock could hold ideas longer than any voice could speak them. The most striking of their creations are the T-shaped pillars, each rising from the temple platform they built at the heart of their small settlement. The pillars are heavy, some weighing several tons, carved from limestone blocks quarried a short distance away. The shape is deliberate, a long vertical shaft topped by a broad horizontal capstone. It is the same form later seen at Göbekli Tepe, but here the scale is more intimate, as though this place was an early experiment in a tradition that would soon grow grander. Along the shafts of some pillars, artisans carved animal figures with surprising skill. The outlines are simple but expressive. A fox with its long tail curling downward, a snake coiled in a rhythmic curve, a water bird with outstretched wings, a boar with a proud squared body. These animals were not chosen at random. They were companions, threats, symbols, and teachers. In a world without written myths, animals were part of the language of meaning. The stelae were arranged within a rectangular ritual building, its walls lined with benches, its floor smooth and prepared. The pillars rose from this platform like silent witnesses to gatherings whose details have vanished. Some archaeologists believe this space served as an early temple, one of the earliest permanent ritual buildings ever constructed. Others think it was a place for ancestral memory, where names were not carved but understood, whispered in the way the light touched stone. A few pillars bear human-like features, long arms carved down the sides, hands meeting at the front, as if the pillar itself stood as a stylized person. This blending of human and stone, animal and symbol, suggests a worldview where boundaries were fluid. The pillars may have been seen as beings rather than objects, guardians of the space, embodiments of stories, or representations of ancestors. The animals carved into them were part of this spiritual ecosystem. The fox, often depicted in early Anatolian sites, may have symbolized cunning or transition. The snake, a creature that shed its skin, may have represented renewal. Birds drawn with open wings could have symbolized movement between worlds. These associations are guesses, yet the carvings carry a sense of intention that makes such speculation meaningful. Navali Chori's community practiced early farming, planting primitive wheat, and herding early forms of sheep and goats. But despite these practical tasks, they devoted enormous time and labor to carving stone, a sign that ritual life was as central as survival. Their temple, rebuilt several times, shows a commitment to maintaining a sacred place through generations. The stelae stayed in place while walls were repaired and floors renewed, suggesting that the pillars held a role that could not be disturbed. When the settlement was finally abandoned, the people did something unexpected. They buried the temple deliberately, filling the space with stone and earth. The pillars were covered carefully, as if the building were being put to rest rather than discarded. This act of burial echoes similar behavior later found at Göbekli Tepe, an intentional closure, a ritual end to a place that had served its purpose. The meaning behind this burial remains unknown, yet it carries a sense of respect, a final gesture to a structure that held memory. When archaeologists excavated Navala Chori, they uncovered not only the pillars, but also delicate figurines carved from limestone and bone. Some are abstract, some human-shaped, some animal-shaped, each suggesting a symbolic world in which form and spirit were intertwined. One human figure, small and simple, has a face removed of detail, as if anonymity itself was a sacred concept. The discovery of the animal stele at Navala Chori helped reshape our understanding of the early Neolithic. It showed that symbolic architecture did not begin suddenly at Göbekli Tepe, but grew from earlier traditions in nearby villages. This region, the northern Fertile Crescent, was a cradle not only of agriculture, but of symbolic thought, of storytelling carved into stone. In the carvings of Navala Chori, there is a quietness that feels ancient and immediate at the same time. The animals appear neither fierce nor passive. They are simply present, as though the stone itself remembers them. The people who carved them did not leave explanations, only form, yet in that form lies connection between human and animal, between earth and spirit, between the beginnings of settled life and the beginnings of belief. Even after the site was submerged beneath the waters of a reservoir in the late 20th century, its carved pillars endure in knowledge, drawings, and relocated fragments. The original temple is gone, but the meaning carved into those stones still speaks, that long before cities, long before texts, people already felt the need to fix their world into something lasting. The carved animal stelae of Navala Chori stand, even in absence, as some of the earliest messages carved by human hands, expressions of a world where every creature carried significance, where stone could hold spirit, and where a small community carved its place into the rhythm of time. They remain a reminder that the first builders of the world did not begin with walls or weapons. They began with symbols, and with the quiet belief that stone could remember what people could not yet write. The colossal red granite rams of Karnak. Along the eastern bank of the Nile, where palm shadows fall across ruined pylons and broken columns, stands a processional path that once led into the very heart of the Egyptian world. It begins not with gates or obelisks, but with guardians. Colossal ram-headed statues, carved from red granite, each one resting upon a pedestal engraved with ancient symbols. Their forms are immense, weathered by centuries, yet unmistakably powerful. These are the ram guardians of Karnak, protectors of a temple complex that once defined religion, kingship, and cosmic order in ancient Egypt. The rams are silent now, but the stone still carries the strength of the sculptor's hands. Their bodies are heavy, muscular, curled around themselves in a protective posture. Their heads, enlarged and idealized, bear the solemn expression associated with Amun, the great god of Thebes. Carved from a material harder than most tools of the time, each statue required months of effort, chiseling, polishing, and shaping stone that came from quarries far upriver. The red granite, flecked with black crystalline veins, was chosen not for ease, but for endurance. The rams formed an avenue of approach to the temple of Amun, stretching between pylons and ceremonial gateways. Priests, kings, and pilgrims would have walked beneath their stone gaze, carrying incense, flowers, and offerings. The rams were more than decoration, they were symbols of protection, power, and stability. In Egyptian thought, the ram was associated with creation, fertility, and divine authority. Amun, the hidden one, often took the form of a ram to represent the unseen force behind all life. Each statue is accompanied by a smaller human figure carved between its front legs. These small figures represent kings, cradled by the god they served. In their proportions, the contrast is striking. The rulers appear almost fragile, dwarfed by the immense bodies of their divine protectors. This was deliberate. It reminded all who entered that the king ruled not by strength alone, but by the favor of Amun. The rams embodied that relationship, projecting both divine might and royal humility. The avenue they stood upon was part of a ritual landscape that connected Karnak to Luxor Temple through the Avenue of Sphinxes, a ceremonial road used during the annual Opet festival. But the rams of Karnak were distinct, heavier, larger, carved from granite instead of limestone. Their bulk suggests that they belonged to a sacred zone within the temple precinct, a place where access was limited to priests and officials. Their stillness was part of their function. As guardians, they watched over the innermost sanctuaries, where offerings were made and rituals whispered in the half-light of incense and lamps. Archaeological work around the statues revealed foundations carefully laid with stones that leveled the ground beneath the procession route. The rams were placed deliberately, aligned with axes that guided movement through the temple. In Egyptian architecture, alignment was meaning. Every direction, every shadow, every turn corresponded to cosmic principle. The ram guardians were therefore part of a larger plan, a design that mirrored creation itself. Their orientation toward the entrance ensured that anyone approaching the sanctuary did so under watchful eyes. The sculpting of these rams required tremendous skill. Granite was notoriously difficult to carve. Craftsmen used dolerite pounders, round stones harder than granite, to slowly shape the raw blocks. The process was slow, exhausting, and meticulous. Each ram had to be consistent in size and proportion, a task that required precise measurement and coordination among teams of artisans. When the rough shape was complete, the surfaces were polished with sand and water, giving the statues a smooth texture that caught the sun like burnished metal. Time has softened some of their details. The folds in their wool, once crisp, are worn. The inscriptions at their bases have faded, but their forms remain intact, their silhouettes still regal against the sky. In the quiet hours of dawn, when the sun rises over the eastern desert and lights their curved horns, they seem to regain the life they once possessed, guardians waking to greet another day. The rams also reflect the evolution of Amun's worship. In earlier periods, the god was associated with air and the unseen. Over time, he absorbed qualities of other deities and rose to prominence during the New Kingdom. The pharaohs of that era, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Ramses II, expanded Karnak's temples into one of the largest religious complexes ever built. The ram guardians were part of that expansion, symbolizing Amun's growing influence and the state's devotion to him. Some rams were moved or reused during later reigns. One carries a reused base, its original inscriptions chiseled away and replaced. Others show signs of ancient repair, indicating that they held significance long after their initial carving. Even during times of political upheaval or religious change, the rams were rarely defaced. Their presence was respected, perhaps feared. In Egyptian thought, statues were not merely representations, they were containers. They held aspects of the divine essence, maintained through ritual and offering. The ram guardians, standing at the threshold of Karnak's sanctuaries, were thus active participants in the spiritual life of the temple. They received offerings, absorbed prayers, and radiated protective power. This belief gives weight to their size and strength. They were meant to feel immovable, dependable, unchanging, a stone embodiment of eternal order. As centuries passed and the temple fell into ruin, sand and debris began to bury the rams. Some remained exposed, their faces emerging from drifting dunes like memories surfacing. Others lay hidden for long periods, preserved beneath layers of earth. Excavations revealed their red granite glow beneath the dust, confirming their resilience. Even erosion could not fully dim their presence. Walking between them now, one senses both their age and their intention. They do not feel like remnants of a lost world, but like guardians in waiting. Their weight, their gaze, their stillness, all communicate the same message the ancient Egyptians intended. You are entering a place of power, and you are seen. The colossal red granite rams of Karnak remain among the most iconic and enigmatic creations of ancient Egypt. They are reminders of a civilization that believed deeply in the unity of architecture, faith, and cosmic order. Their forms echo not only the grandeur of kings, but the quiet certainty of stone shaped with purpose. They guard an entrance that no longer leads to living ritual, yet their presence remains complete, not as relics, but as watchers who have endured long after the world they protected faded into sand and sky. The forgotten megaliths of Mane-Kariand. Across the wind-swept plains of Brittany, where the Atlantic mist moves low over the grass, rows of ancient stones rise from the earth like the ribs of a forgotten creature. Long before written history, before kingdoms or chronicles, people stood these stones upright, aligning them into long corridors that stretch across the landscape with a purpose we still cannot fully understand. These are the megaliths of Mane-Kariand, one of the quieter corners of the great Karnak complex, overshadowed by the famous alignments nearby, yet holding its own quiet, powerful mystery. Hidden among small roads and farm fields, Mane-Kariand consists of 3 separate alignments, stones set in parallel rows, forming what look like ancient passageways. Unlike the towering menhirs of Karnak, these are smaller and more intimate, but arranged with the same sense of intention. Each stone stands where someone, thousands of years ago, chose to place it. Each position seems deliberate, guided by a pattern we can no longer read. The origins of these stones trace back to the Neolithic, roughly 4500 Quine to 3500 BCE, a time when farming communities flourished across Western Europe and people began shaping the land with earthworks, tombs, and standing stones. Brittany became one of the most active centers of this tradition. Across its fields, thousands of menhirs, dolmens, and alignments were raised, forming what is now the largest concentration of prehistoric megaliths anywhere in the world. Mane-Kariand sits within that tradition, yet it remains distinct, quieter, tucked away, preserved with less alteration than many of the larger sites. At first glance, the stones may appear simple, rough granite blocks weathered by centuries of rain and wind, but when you walk among them, the arrangement reveals itself. The rows create narrow corridors, each stone marking a rhythm in the earth. These pathways do not lead to a tomb or temple. Instead, they seem to mark movement, as if people once walked between them in procession, following a path defined by stone and sky. The soil around the alignments contains traces of hearths, broken pottery, and flint tools, suggesting that Mont Carien was not an isolated monument but part of a living landscape. People gathered here for ritual, for ceremony, or perhaps simply to mark the turning of seasons. The stones may have aligned with the sun or moon. They may have echoed ancestral roots or territorial boundaries. None of these theories can be proven, yet each feels possible when standing in the quiet between the rows. What makes Mont Carien haunting is the intimacy of its scale. Where other Karnak sites overwhelm by sheer number and height, this one allows closeness. You can stand among the stones and imagine how the builders placed them, lifting each block from the ground, dragging it on wooden rollers or ropes, setting it upright with careful balance. These stones are not massive like the stones of Stonehenge. They are human-sized, shaped for interaction, touch, and presence. The granite used here was quarried from nearby outcrops. The builders selected stones of similar height and shape, creating a sense of order without exact uniformity. This balance between structure and natural form is characteristic of Neolithic architecture, design that works with the landscape rather than against it. Archaeologists believe that the alignments once extended further, but time, agriculture, and erosion have broken the full pattern. What remains, however, still carries the intent of the original builders. Each stone is covered with lichen and moss, its surface softened by centuries. Rainwater has carved small channels along the sides, creating textures that almost look like ancient carvings. When mist gathers, the stones seem to dissolve into the landscape. When the sun rises at low angle, their shadows stretch long across the ground, revealing alignments invisible at midday. Many megalithic sites in Brittany show astronomical connections, alignments with solstices, lunar standstills, and star paths. Whether Mont Carien shares these orientations remains uncertain, but its rows are not random. They follow a gentle curve consistent with other Neolithic constructions in the region. This suggests that the site formed part of a wider sacred geography, a network of ritual spaces connected by landscape, belief, and time. The alignments also raise questions about community. Building a site like this required cooperation. Dozens of people working together, guided by leaders or shared intention. The time invested into these stones indicates that life here was not only about survival. People cared about memory, about place, about marking their presence in a way that would outlast them. The stones are not simply remnants of a culture, they are evidence of its values. One of the most intriguing features of Mont Carien is how the three alignments relate to each other. They sit close yet separate, forming a loose triangle. Some scholars suggest they may represent different groups or clans, each responsible for one segment. Others propose they were used sequentially. One alignment for initiation, another for gathering, another for ceremony. Though purely speculative, these interpretations reflect the human impulse to understand structure, even when the original meaning is lost. In many Neolithic sites, stone rows are connected to burial mounds or passage graves. At Mont Carien, no such tomb has been found directly attached, but several known barrows lie within walking distance. It is possible that the alignments were part of a funerary journey, paths along which the living guided the memory of the dead. In that sense, the stones are not monuments but stages, places where community, life, and death intertwined. Over thousands of years, the site has endured storms, plowing, and slow weathering. Some stones have fallen, others lean. Yet many still stand exactly where they were placed. Their endurance speaks to the builder's understanding of the landscape, choosing ground solid enough to hold stone upright across millennia. No inscription marks these stones. No symbol explains them. All we have is their presence and the stillness they create. Standing among the forgotten megaliths of Mont Carien, one feels a strange clarity. The stones are quiet, but the quiet is meaningful. It feels as if the builders intended these corridors not to instruct, but to invite, to allow each generation to walk between the stones and sense something beyond words. These stones do not tell us what they were for. They simply remind us that long before history, humans were already shaping the earth not only for shelter, but for meaning. They built places where they could gather, remember, and imagine. They raised stones to stand against time, and time, remarkably, has listened. Mont Carien remains one of those places where the ancient world still meets the present without explanation. Not because the stones are large, but because they are deliberate. Not because they reveal their purpose, but because they conceal it. And in that mystery they continue to hold the story of a people whose names are lost, but whose presence still shapes the land. The Eagle Box, Stone Chest of Ica. Across the desert plains of southern Peru, where the wind moves low across the earth and the horizon blurs into pale heat, lies a landscape shaped by ancient hands, geoglyphs carved into sand, forgotten temples buried beneath dunes, and stones marked by cultures that left no written explanation. Among these relics sits one of the strangest and least understood artifacts of the Peruvian coast. A heavy stone chest carved with the image of a powerful avian deity, an object known today as the Eagle Box of Ica. The chest was found in the rugged desert valleys near the city of Ica, a region inhabited by early Andean cultures long before the rise of the Nazca, Wari, or Inca. This box, carved from a single block of dark stone, is not large in height, but massive in weight. Its presence alone suggests intention, an object meant to endure, meant to be touched by generations, and placed carefully within ceremonial environments. The most striking feature is the carving on its lid, an eagle-like figure with outstretched wings, talons poised, and a head rendered in sharp geometric lines. The design is bold, confident, and symmetrical. Its wings form a protective arc around the central panel, as if guarding whatever was once kept inside. The creature is neither naturalistic nor entirely abstract. It is a symbol, a representation of something sacred, powerful, or ancestral. Throughout the ancient Andes, birds held special significance. The condor was a messenger between worlds, the falcon, a symbol of vision and leadership. Other raptors embodied protection, strength, or the ability to travel between realms. The avian deity carved on the Ica chest may have belonged to this lineage, a guardian of offerings or ritual items, a spiritual intermediary, or the emblem of a clan or priestly order. The chest's construction adds to its mystery. Hollowing out a single block of stone required not only skill but patience. Ancient Andean craftsmen used pounding stones, sand grinding, and fire softening techniques to shape rock. To create a hollow cavity with smooth internal walls and perfectly fitted lid edges demanded precision and an understanding of stone behavior. Nothing about the box feels accidental. Its thickness, weight, and proportions suggest it was meant to be sealed, protected, and revisited only under specific ritual circumstances. Inside, archaeologists found no surviving contents. The desert's dryness, though protective in many cases, does not preserve everything. What it once held is unknown. Perhaps offerings, ritual objects, textiles, pigments, feathers, or small figurines used in ceremonies. The emptiness does not diminish the chest's purpose, it amplifies it, leaving space for the imagination and for questions that archaeology cannot yet answer. Some researchers propose that the chest served as part of a ritual bundle, an Andean tradition where sacred objects were gathered, wrapped, and preserved for generations. Bundles were believed to contain the essence of ancestors, deities, or protective forces. The stone chest may have been the outer vessel shielding such a bundle from harm. If so, it would have been used in ceremonies to mark seasons, honor the dead, or legitimize the authority of leaders. The carving style resembles early coastal iconography associated with cultures such as Paracas or early Nazca, groups known for their textile art, geoglyphs, and ritual landscapes. The eagle figure, with its rigid geometry and poised stance, fits comfortably within this visual language. And unlike the sprawling lines of the Nazca Desert, this carving was intimate, a symbol carved into an object meant for hands, for proximity, for the quiet interior of a temple. The site where the chest was found revealed other clues, fragments of pottery decorated with bold red and black designs, signs of ceremonial pits, and traces of pigments used in ritual painting. These remnants suggest a community deeply invested in symbolic practice, a culture that used objects like the eagle box to anchor meaning in their world, to protect what mattered, and to communicate with the unseen. One detail of the carving stands out. The eyes of the eagle, deeply inset, seem almost alert. The lines around the beak and wings suggest movement, a readiness, a vigilance. It is not a peaceful bird but a guardian, a watcher. This may hint at its ritual role, a protector of sacred contents, a spiritual sentinel stationed at the threshold between everyday life and ceremony. Yet for all its clarity of form, its purpose remains elusive. No inscriptions accompany the chest, no direct parallels in nearby sites fully explain it. It exists as a solitary piece of a larger puzzle, one that connects the people of ancient Ica to a spiritual system we can see only dimly. The desert around Ica has a reputation for concealing its past. Many ancient structures lie beneath layers of sand, artifacts appear after storms or shifts in the earth. The eagle box was one such rediscovery, an object preserved by the environment that once served a role in a shrine or ceremonial chamber, now lost to time. The chest itself endured because of stone's permanence, but the world that created it vanished quietly, leaving only fragments. Examining the chest, one notices the balance between strength and delicacy. The outside walls are thick, but the carved image is crisp and fine. The lid fits neatly over the body, suggesting repeated use and a need for secure containment. The interior cavity shows signs of careful smoothing, as if the objects placed inside deserved respect. Nothing about it feels rushed or improvised. Some scholars have suggested that the avian figure may represent not an eagle but a mythical hybrid, a creature born from local cosmology. Across the Andes, beings combining human, animal, and spirit qualities appear frequently. Figures that represent transformation, flight of the soul, or the power to traverse different realms. The chest might therefore symbolize the crossing between worlds, the joining of earth and sky, body and spirit, seen and unseen. Whatever interpretation one chooses, the chest's power lies not in certainty, but in its ambiguity. It stands as a reminder that ancient cultures communicated in ways modern archaeology only partially understands, through symbol, ritual, material, and silence. The eagle box, in its weight and simplicity, is a vessel of meaning that outlived the language of its makers. Today, the desert continues to shift around the site where it was found. The wind carries fine dust across the old ceremonial grounds, the sun bleaches stone and earth alike, but the carving on the eagle box remains sharp, a guardian image watching across centuries, still holding its purpose even when its story has grown faint. The eagle box stone chest of Ica is not just an artifact, it is a memory carved into rock, a symbol of protection, ritual, and belief, from a people who understood that some truths were not meant to be written, but carried, sealed, and passed forward in silence. The ruins of Hegra, al-Hijr. In the deep silence of northwest Arabia, where wind brushes across empty plains and sandstone cliffs rise like ancient monuments of the earth itself, lies a place that once stood at the crossroads of civilizations, hidden for centuries beneath shifting light and drifting sand. The necropolis of Hegra, or al-Hijr, preserves a world carved directly into stone, a world shaped by the same Nabatean craftsmen who built Petra, yet different in intention, style, and mystery. Here, more than 100 monumental tombs stand untouched, their facades rising from rock faces like windows to another age. Long before empires controlled these deserts, caravans moved through this land carrying incense, myrrh, spices, and textiles from far beyond Arabia. Hegra became one of the great stations along this network, a place where merchants rested, negotiated, and buried their dead with the dignity granted to wealth and lineage. Where Petra was a royal capital, Hegra became its southern guardian, a city of tombs, shrines, and quiet ceremonial life carved into the fabric of the desert cliff. The sandstone of Hegra is soft enough to carve yet strong enough to endure. Nabatean artisans exploited this quality with unmatched precision. Each tomb begins as a raw cliff, then slowly transforms, first by marking its outline, then cutting the edges, then hollowing the chamber within. The process leaves no joints, no mortar, no brick, only stone shaped into permanence. More than 111 tombs have been identified at Hegra. Their faces vary in size and ornamentation, but share elements that mark them as distinctively Nabatean: stepped crowns at the top, framed doorways, and finely carved columns. Some are large enough to dwarf a person standing at their base. Others remain half-hidden, carved deeper into the cliff, as if meant for a smaller, quieter purpose. Many of them bear inscriptions, names of families, titles of officials, warnings to preserve the sanctity of the tomb. These carved words give voice to people otherwise lost to history: merchants, governors, priests, and their kin. Inside the tombs, niches line the walls, each meant to hold a body wrapped with care. The silence of these chambers feels heavy, as if the stone itself remembers the rituals once practiced there: the lighting of lamps, the placing of offerings, the slow recitation of prayers meant to guide the dead into the next world. The Nabateans believed strongly in remembrance. Carving a tomb into living rock was a way of ensuring the dead were not dissolved by time. Yet Hegra was more than a burial ground. Scattered throughout the site lie traces of wells, water channels, and the faint outlines of ancient dwellings. The Nabateans were masters of water management, able to coax sustenance from even the driest landscapes. At Hegra they built channels to guide rainwater, cisterns to store it, and systems of distribution that allowed the settlement to flourish despite the surrounding desert. The remains of these structures reveal a community that understood both the harshness and the precision of their environment. The positioning of the tombs reflects this same understanding. Many face specific directions toward cliffs, open plains, or pathways, suggesting symbolic or practical significance. Some tombs are clustered in groups, perhaps belonging to extended families. Others stand alone, carved high above the ground, visible from great distances. The Nabateans believed that tombs should be part of the landscape, not hidden away. Through these monumental facades they expressed both identity and continuity, placing the memory of their ancestors against the eternal backdrop of the desert. Walking among the tombs, one notices how each facade plays with light. At dawn, shadows fill the openings, leaving the carved crowns glowing above them. At midday, the cliffs appear almost polished, the carvings sharp and defined. By sunset, everything softens, and the tombs take on a warm amber hue. The Nabateans understood this natural rhythm. Their monuments feel alive, not because they move, but because the light moves across them. One of the most striking tombs is known for its scale and precision. A tall facade with crisp edges and elegant proportions that suggests it belonged to a high official or a wealthy merchant. Nearby, a smaller tomb carries an inscribed curse, invoking divine protection against anyone who might disturb its rest. These inscriptions reveal not only spiritual beliefs, but also the presence of law and community enforcement, showing that the Nabateans had developed sophisticated social structures. The necropolis also hints at cultural exchange. Decorative elements blend styles from Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia: lotus flowers, classical capitals, winged figures, and protective symbols carved above doorways. This fusion reflects Hegra's position along major trade routes, where ideas and art traveled alongside goods. Here, far from the grand courts of Mediterranean cities, architectural motifs were reinterpreted in sandstone cliffs, becoming uniquely Nabatean, yet universally recognizable. Over time, Hegra experienced periods of decline and renewal. After the height of Nabatean civilization, the region slowly shifted. The desert advanced, trade routes changed, and the city was eventually abandoned. Yet the stone endured. Wind carved the outer surfaces, smoothing lines and softening edges, but the core structures remained intact. Unlike cities built of brick or mud, Hegra's monuments could not crumble. They were carved into the mountain itself. The silence that surrounds the site today feels ancient rather than empty. It is a silence that carries weight, the echo of footsteps across stone floors, the murmur of desert wind against carved walls, the memory of rituals performed outside these monumental facades. The landscape itself seems to hold its breath, as if aware that even in abandonment, these tombs still possess meaning. What makes Hegra striking is not only its preservation, but its solitude. Without a city rising around it, the necropolis stands on open ground, unshielded from the horizon. The cliffs form a natural amphitheater where the tombs appear as carved guardians, lined in ranks across the stone. The desert stretches endlessly beyond them, placing the monuments in stark relief. Humanity's effort to create endurance, set against nature's vast simplicity. The ruins of Hegra stand today as one of the most complete and least altered Nabatean sites in the world. They reveal a civilization that mastered both artistry and engineering, that understood stone not as obstacle but as opportunity, and that saw death not as disappearance but as continuity. Each tomb is a doorway without a threshold, a facade without a building, a symbol without words, yet together they create a landscape of memory. The builders of Hegra carved their lives and beliefs into the cliffs, trusting that stone would remember what time might forget. And in the quiet expanse of the Arabian desert, their trust has been honored. Their monuments survive not as ruins but as echoes, reminders of a world where trade, faith, and artistry shaped cities from the very bones of the earth. The lost city of Musawwar, Orat es-Sufra. Across the silent sandstone desert of northern Sudan, far from the Nile, and deeper still into the heat of the eastern plains, lies a ruin that feels more like a puzzle carved into the earth than a city. Hidden among rolling hills of sun-bleached rock is Musawwarat es-Sufra, an ancient Nubian complex whose walls and courtyards stretch across the desert floor like the blueprint of a forgotten world. It is vast, geometric, and strangely quiet, a place that once carried purpose, yet now sits in stillness, offering only the shape of its memory. To approach Musawwarat is to first see nothing. Then slowly, walls begin to rise from the ground, sandstone blocks stacked in long formations, forming a maze of courtyards and passages. Unlike a normal settlement, no homes line its pathways, no markets, no fortifications. Instead, the complex unfolds like a ceremonial labyrinth. Wide platforms, long ramps, chambers within chambers, and a sense of scale, unusual even for ancient Nubia. Archaeologists call it the Great Enclosure, and it remains one of the most enigmatic architectural works of the Meroitic Kingdom. The Meroitic civilization thrived between the 3rd century BCE and the 4th century CE, ruling from the royal centers of Meroe and Napata. Their kings built pyramids on desert sands and left inscriptions in a script still not fully understood. But at Musawwarat, they built something different. Here, architecture feels ritualistic, almost symbolic, a place designed for movement rather than residence. Long corridors loop back on themselves, ramps rise to platforms whose purposes remain uncertain. Walls are thick and high, enclosing courtyards, large enough to gather crowds or host ceremonies whose details have vanished into time. And scattered across these walls is the one clue that has obsessed researchers for decades: elephants. Dozens of them, carved into stone blocks, etched onto reliefs, appearing over and over with deliberate emphasis. Some are shown in procession, others standing beside priests, and some wearing harnesses or symbolic ornaments. The imagery is too consistent to be decoration. It suggests that Musawwarat was once tied to elephants, either spiritually or practically, in a way no other Nubian site was. The idea that this place might have been an elephant sanctuary is not as strange as it sounds. In the ancient world, Nubia was renowned for elephants. Before the rise of cavalry, war elephants were considered the ultimate symbol of military strength, used by kingdoms across Africa and the Mediterranean. The wide courtyards and massive ramps at Musawwarat could have accommodated these animals. Some scholars believe elephants were trained here, fed here, even worshipped here. Their presence in carvings supports this view, and so does the size of the architecture itself. Yet the spiritual interpretation is equally compelling. Elephants were symbols of power, memory, and divine authority. In the desert silence, their carved images feel almost ceremonial, part of a ritual landscape where animals served not as tools, but as symbols in royal theology. Beside the elephant carvings appear depictions of the lion-headed god Epidemic, a deity unique to the Nubian world. His temples, found near Musawarat, suggest that this entire region formed a sacred zone where gods, kings, and animals converged. Walking deeper into the great enclosure, one enters spaces that seem designed for processions, broad pathways leading into narrow passages, then opening suddenly into large squares. The architecture feels intentional, planned for controlled movement of people or animals. It is almost theatrical, like the backstage of a ceremony repeated for generations. But Musawarat was not only a single monument. A short distance away stands another temple, smaller but far more refined, the Lion Temple. Its reliefs show gods, kings, animals, and ceremonial scenes carved with delicate detail. Though damaged, their quality reveals the artistic skill of the Meroitic craftsman. If the great enclosure represents ritual through space, the Lion Temple represents ritual through imagery, the spiritual heart of a larger sacred complex. The desert surrounding the ruins holds clues as well. Ancient wells and reservoirs suggest that this was once an active ritual center, prepared to host large gatherings, festivals, or pilgrimages. The water systems were sophisticated, capturing seasonal rains and channeling them into holding tanks. This level of planning implies that Musawarat was meant to sustain crowds, priests, dancers, pilgrims, or animal handlers, for extended periods. And then there are the inscriptions, words written in Meroitic script, still unreadable. They lie on scattered stones and broken blocks, offering names, dedications, or instructions we cannot decipher. Without their translation, the purpose of the complex remains incomplete, a story with its central chapter missing. The writing refuses to reveal the rituals once carried out here, leaving us only with architecture and imagination. But traces of usage survive. One courtyard shows signs of repeated pounding, the compacted earth forming a hardened surface, as if countless feet or hooves crossed it over centuries. Another chamber contains offering tables, their surfaces worn by the hands of worshippers. Carved blocks from the entrance depict elephants shaded by parasols, a motif suggesting reverence rather than utility. These scattered hints form a picture. Musawarat was likely a sanctuary, part ritual center, part pilgrimage site, part symbol of royal authority. When the Meroitic kingdom began to decline, the desert slowly reclaimed the complex. The sand moved into courtyards, wind smoothed the carvings, blocks shifted and fell. The elephants faded into silence, their once sacred forms now touched only by drifting shadows. For centuries, the entire site lay lost beneath earth and time. When archaeologists rediscovered it, the structure defied their expectations. It did not resemble Egyptian temples or Roman forts or African settlements. It was uniquely Nubian, a design not borrowed but created, rooted in a world where animals, gods, and rulers shared symbolic roles. Standing inside the great enclosure now, one feels the vastness not in height but in space. Walls rise around you like the edges of a ritual arena. The desert wind carries only sound of sand moving against stone, and in that silence, the carvings seem to watch, especially the elephants, whose outlines, though worn, still carry the weight of ceremony. The mystery of Musawarat es-Sufra is not that we cannot explain it, it is that explanation may never be singular. It could have been a sanctuary, a training ground, a temple, a ceremonial complex, or something combining all these functions. Its builders did not think in categories. They built in meaning, meaning expressed through scale, animal reverence, and stone. The lost city of Musawarat es-Sufra remains one of the greatest enigmas of ancient Nubia. Its walls carry the echo of a civilization that understood architecture, not as shelter, but as symbol. Its carvings preserve a world where humans and animals were bound through sacred purpose, and its silence holds the memory of rituals carried out beneath the desert sun, long before their meaning slipped into the dunes. It is a ruin left by a kingdom that shaped stone as if shaping belief, a reminder that even in forgotten places, ancient genius still lingers, waiting in the shadows of sandstone corridors.